Chapter 1282. There was a strange silence in the air. It was like a very real and long dream. Both Qin Weibai and Li Guangtu were in a trance. In particular, Qin Weibai's spiritual fluctuations were extremely violent. Her somewhat absent-minded thoughts set off one spiritual storm after another in an instant. Li Guangtu, who was in a trance, and Yu Donglai, who had a surprised look on his face, were all shrouded in it. Yu Donglai just wanted to say something, but his whole person was already frozen in place. The laboratory in front of him had disappeared in an instant. What appeared in Yu Donglai's vision was the vast, distant, and despairing starry sky. Specks of light slowly moved at the edge of his vision. Yu Donglai struggled with all his strength, but he couldn't make any sound. His heart began to sink. Qin Weibai was in the transcendent realm. But Qin Weibai was not in the transcendent realm. In another time and space, after Dongcheng Huangtu died, Gu Xianyan, whose heart was already dead, did enter this realm. At that time, her mental power even inadvertently affected her son, Li Dongcheng, so that Li Dongcheng kept a very complete and clear memory from an early age, and indirectly created an extremely crazy and extreme sword god. At that time, Gu Xianyan's spirit was already a little abnormal. After completing her revenge, Gu Xianyan became Qin Weibai. Her mental power, which was almost out of control, also returned to zero with the recovery of her sanity. It was not until Mormons that she completely let go of everything and returned to that realm. Now Qin Weibai, this was the first time that she entered the transcendent realm in the spiritual realm. She had no experience at all. The unintentional spiritual storm directly enveloped Yu Donglai and Li Guangtu. After a long time, Qin Weibai took a deep breath, and the surrounding spiritual storm gradually subsided. Yu Donglai and Li Guangtu's bodies shook at the same time. They kept taking deep breaths, and their faces were covered with cold sweat. Qin Weibai said slowly. Her voice was firm. There was someone here just now. Who? Yu Donglai wiped his sweat and smiled bitterly. The mental power of the transcendent realm could easily affect the peak of the invincible realm, and could even affect the real chosen one to a certain extent. This meant that from this moment on, although Qin Weibai didn't know martial arts, no one in the world, including Li Tianlan, could threaten her life. The spiritual power of the transcendent realm. Yu Donglai didn't expect that he would be lucky enough to experience it one day. The moment the boundless spiritual storm enveloped him, he was already in the cold and lonely starry sky. Only specks of light flickered in the extremely distant darkness, unable to approach. It was impossible to see clearly. Qin Weibai was silent for a moment and shook her head. Someone showed up here and talked to you about killing and destruction. Old man, have you forgotten all that? What are you talking about? Yu Donglai suddenly stopped halfway through his words. His brows furrowed tightly. What Qin Weibai did not notice was, Li Guangtu on the side also frowned. At this moment, Yu Donglai and Li Guangtu were two different people with two different faces, but their expressions were exactly the same. What kind of people are they? Yu Donglai suddenly asked. I don't know. Qin Weibai shook her head. He was a person who would be remembered for a long time at first sight. He wore a black dragon robe and was covered in wounds. Yu Donglai's expression became more and more confused. He shook his head hard and muttered to himself. Killing. Destruction. Qin Weibai stared at him closely. She couldn't tell why she was looking for that person, but her intuition told her that the other party should be able to tell her a lot of things. And these things were extremely important to herself, to Tianlan, and even to Dongcheng in another time and space. Qin Weibai's spiritual power had entered the transcendent realm. She was sure that all the things she had just experienced were real to some extent, not an illusion. In that movie, decades of time passed quickly, and most of the scenes were locked on Li Dongcheng. The purpose of the other party was clearly visible. The main purpose of the other party's visit was not to invite her and Li Guangtu to watch this movie. The other party's main purpose seemed to be Li Dongcheng. In that time and space, when her child saw her, she clearly heard the laughter of the man in the dragon robe. It was as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders, and she seemed to have made a prop for her son. What do you think of? Qin Weibai looked at Yu Donglai and asked. It seems someone talked to me about this topic. He said how to kill a city in the fastest way. I said poison. He said. He said that poison can only be used to kill people, not to deal with inanimate objects. If the inanimate objects have life and the city has life, how can we completely destroy the structure of the inanimate objects? He said. I can't remember. He said his surname is Lin. It's like a dream. I seem to have had a dream just now. No, I've been eating. Did I fall asleep? Qin Weibai was confused. His surname was Lin. This was the only useful clue, but it was also useless. Qin Weibai turned to the control area of the laboratory and turned on the monitor before the laboratory. It began to play from the moment Yu Donglai and Li Guangtu entered the laboratory. Qin Weibai saw that she and Li Guangtu came to the hibernation chamber of Dongqing Rushi. She also saw Yu Donglai drinking red wine and eating dried fruits to entertain himself. From beginning to end, there was nothing unusual. She and Li Guangtu did not leave the hibernation chamber at all in the monitor. They were not even in a daze or distracted during the whole process. Qin Weibai frowned tightly. All of this could even be regarded as a supernatural event. Qin Weibai watched it again unwillingly. Her spiritual power gradually spread out, and she stared at the monitor screen with great concentration. There was nothing unusual in the first minute. There was nothing unusual in the 10th minute. 15 minutes. 23 minutes. 24 minutes. 25 minutes. There was nothing unusual. 26 minutes. Qin Weibai's pupils suddenly contracted. She did not know if there was anything unusual in the 26th minute of the monitor, because in the monitor record, the 26th minute did not exist at all. 25 minutes and 59 seconds of the monitor. 29 minutes and 37 seconds of the monitor. Where did the 4 minutes in the middle go? The surveillance footage played naturally, without any trace of editing. But the monitor from 25 minutes to 29 minutes disappeared inexplicably. Yu Donglai had already forgotten what had happened in those few minutes, but she still remembered it clearly, right? Qin Weibai took a deep breath. A slight chill came out from the depths of her heart. It was like fear. It was very faint, but it was extremely real. She slowly stood up straight and reached out to turn off the monitor screen. The screen slowly darkened, getting darker and darker, and finally turned off completely. At the moment when the screen went black, Qin Weibai inadvertently glanced at the screen. The light in the control area was still on. The light illuminated the dark monitor screen. Everything was in an extremely quiet environment. The figure that Qin Weibai had been looking for before appeared on the dark monitor screen. No, it was reflected on the screen in front of her. Chapter 1283. The figure reflected on the screen was so clear that it seemed to be close at hand. It was as if someone was already standing behind her, very close. Qin Weibai suddenly turned around. She saw soft lights, chair back, water dispenser, sofa. No one was there. Qin Weibai narrowed her eyes and looked back at the dark monitor screen again. The figure in the black dragon robe was still clear on the screen. Qin Weibai could even see the countless complex and changing patterns on his dragon robe. This was the image of someone standing behind her, and the figure was reflected on the screen. Qin Weibai turned around again. Still no one. She was silent for a long time before she said lightly, "Who the hell are you?" The figure on the screen did not respond and did not move. "Don't want to say? Or can't say?" Qin Weibai raised her eyebrows slightly. The figure was still quiet. Qin Weibai was silent for a few seconds and stood up. "Anyway, I don't like your tricks." After a pause she continued, "But the movie was wonderful." She seemed to be completely calm. From Gu Xianyan in another time and space to the present Qin Weibai. When she was very young, she met herself. Completely transparent memories, completely synchronized thoughts, absolutely consistent feelings. They were obviously two individuals, but they were also one person. Qin Weibai's life was wonderful enough because she had experienced too many things. For her, there was almost nothing she couldn't accept. She might not understand those things, but they were not unreasonable. She had experienced time travel. What else could make her feel new? She now had that repeated dream almost every night. It seemed to be endless, constantly boring and repetitive starry sky. One galaxy after another, dark, lonely, but full of vitality. She controlled everything in her dream. She imagined thousands of trillions of interstellar fleets, imagined countless unimaginable races, and built a mechanical army that could cover the galaxy, just to find her own goal. Compared with the dream she experienced every night, everything in front of her was nothing. In this movie, the way the other party existed seemed very strange and mysterious. And mysterious, to put it bluntly, she just didn't understand it. When she really figured out the key, she would find that it was nothing more than that. Since he couldn't understand it, he might as well not think about it. At the very least, she hadn't sensed any malice from him since the beginning. No malice, just kindness. If the other party's target was her and Tianlan, she would see them again sooner or later since they still had a long life ahead of them. Even if the other party had nothing to do with him and Tianlan, and only cared about Dongcheng, he was just a tool this time. But the final result was worth his gratitude. So be it. Qin Weibai nodded at the shadow on the screen. Goodbye. She turned around and walked back to the resting area. Yu Donglai was still thinking hard. In his mind, the figure that Qin Weibai mentioned seemed to become clearer and clearer, but the content of their conversation became more and more vague. He held the glass in his hand and kept mumbling to himself. Li Guangtu was obviously a little autistic. He sat silently on the sofa, without sadness or joy, like a lifeless statue. Qin Weibai looked at him expressionlessly. Even after watching the movie and seeing the end of the Li family, her inner disgust for the Li family still did not disappear. Aren't you going to scram? Qin Weibai's voice was cold. Are you going to stay for dinner? Li Guangtu looked up at her. His eyes were bloodshot, and he said in a hoarse voice, I need an explanation. There was no concept of another time and space in his mind, so everything he experienced was somewhat inexplicable, but extremely shocking. Li Huawu was alive. His parents were Li Tianlan and Gu Xianyan's sword god. A movie that seemed to happen in reality, but it intersected with the present reality. The successful purgatory of Heaven Capital. It completely became a laughingstock, not even a laughingstock. No one mentioned the Li family anymore. Fake. Illusory? In the passage of time that seemed to have nothing to do with reality, the sword god in the movie really intersected with the present world. Li Guangtu could not persuade himself to ignore those things. The scar left by the sword energy on Mount Dibbing was still there. It was an unsolved mystery of the whole dark world. Such a sword could not make Li Guangtu deceive himself. People. He could feel the real reality from this movie. Sword God still existed. A world that seemed to be able to occasionally interact with this time and space. Was this the truth? Li Guangtu stared at Qin Weibai, and his eyes were extremely nervous. Old man, see the guest out. Qin Weibai's voice was cold and indifferent. There was not the slightest hint of emotion on her perfect, expressionless face. Yu Donglai, who was still a little confused, seemed to have given up thinking. He shook his head helplessly, stood up and said, Let's go. Li Guangtu did not move, but looked at Qin Weibai stubbornly. Qin Weibai was also looking at him. Her bright eyes flickered, reminding him of the cold stars flashing in the boundless barren distance when he was just shrouded by Qin Weibai's spiritual storm. He turned silently and slowly followed Yu Donglai out of the lab. Qin Weibai stood there and waited for about half an hour. The young man in a black dragon robe still did not appear. She did not return to the control area to watch the monitor, but opened the elevator again. The elevator went all the way up to the surface. As soon as Qin Weibai left and the elevator door closed, the door closed. In the control area of the laboratory, on the dark screen, the extremely clear shadow moved. He seemed to be walking on an endless road. The wide dragon robe on his body was fluttering. He was getting faster and faster, but he never reached the end. Just like that, he repeated the action of walking silently, as if he was going to repeat this action forever. After a long time, the figure on the screen took another step forward. His action was no different from before, but this step seemed to have reached the end. His figure walked directly out of the darkness of the monitor screen. On the black dragon robe, countless complicated patterns turned into strange patterns under the light. The young man with a chiseled face and a sharp aura all over his body looked around quietly. After a long while, he pinched his forehead and sighed as if he was a little embarrassed and did not know whether to laugh or cry. What bullsh asterisk T, I almost couldn't get out. If I can't think of anything, I'll just stop thinking. What kind of stupid train of thought is that? You should at least think about it again. I have something to do these 2 days, so I will write less. I will try to write more tomorrow. Chapter 1284. Li Huaqing has already left with Li Guangtu. Qin Weibai's elevator went from the lab to the ground, from the ground to the top floor of the castle, through the corridor, and back to the balcony. Li Tianlan was still sitting in his seat, staring at the main road of Emperor Dong's palace without saying a word. In his sight, the black Mercedes-Benz was driving slowly on the road. It was getting farther and farther away from the castle, and closer to the gate of Emperor Dong's palace. The car was a gift from Li Tianlan, because the Flourishing Age Fund secretly held a large number of shares of the Daimler Group. Mercedes-Benz was almost the standard vehicle of the Emperor Dong's palace. It was a piece of cake to give one to Li Huaqing. Qin Weibai hesitated and sat in Li Tianlan's arms. She picked up her hair and touched Li Tianlan's face. She asked with a smile, "Are they going back to Tiandu City?" "Yes. The Purgatory of Heaven capital will leave Tiannan within 24 hours. The Parliament still attaches great importance to the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The Army Ministry will directly send a transport plane to pick up all the people and materials. I just informed Han Xinyan to let Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud take some people to take over Tiandu City and stabilize the situation first. Then the City Hall will send the Mayor of Tiandu City, the Chief Administrative Officer, and the Chief Legal Officer. When they figure out the situation, we will allocate funds and start the city transformation plan." He had a headache. "We're still too short of people right now. After the election, many problems can be solved." Qin Weibai said softly. The current Emperor Dong's palace could be said to be the most powerful superpower in the dark world. Li Tianlan did not lack masters or money, but he lacked a lot of talents in various fields, especially in the field of administration. There was a serious shortage. For a city or a province, it was not enough to appoint a few high-level officials. In any structure that could establish a certain order, the middle level and grassroots were indispensable. Sometimes they were even more important than the high-level officials. What Emperor Dong's palace lacked at the moment was this kind of talent. The only way for Emperor Dong's palace to deal with this situation was to poach people from all over the Zhongzhou state. But the effect of poaching people was not ideal. Many people who planned to come to Tiannan could not meet the requirements of Emperor Dong's palace, and those who could meet the requirements might not be willing to come. In the past 2 years, the current administrative power of Xianyuan City had reached 3,000 people, involving various departments such as transportation, public security, construction, finance, commerce, etc. And this number was far from enough. Not to mention the fact that a considerable portion of the 3,000 people were not qualified. The whole of Xianyuan City now had the prototype of a prosperous city in terms of structure, but it was far from being up to standard in terms of software. This was also the reason why Emperor Dong's palace didn't unify Tiannan even though it had enough strength. There was simply not enough manpower. Now, with the withdrawal of the Purgatory of Heaven capital from Tiannan, the territory they left in Tiannan was bound to be taken over by Emperor Dong's palace, even if they had to bite the bullet. At this point, Emperor Dong's palace could not give in at all. It could only keep moving forward. If it took a step back, it might lead to countless speculations from various forces. If it was used by people with ulterior motives, it might lead to countless consequences. There's still a year before the election. Li Tianlan shook her head. After the election, he would have an official identity. Whether he was a member of parliament, a special advisor of Zhongzhou state, or the deputy minister of the army headquarters, his identity could enable him to transfer many people from various agencies of Zhongzhou state to supplement the manpower needed in various aspects of Tiannan to a certain extent. In addition, a few months later, Emperor Dong's palace would graduate from the 2 academies. It had already begun to prepare for the recruitment work before that. It was totally a cruel posture to catch all the talents of the 2 academies in one fell swoop. Various agencies in Zhongzhou state that were waiting for fresh blood had already been complaining, but Li Tianlan didn't care about it at all. With Li Tianlan's current power in the dark world, It was not difficult at all to recruit people from the two academies. But this group of people was mostly combatants, and there was still a shortage of administrative personnel. After the election, Emperor Dong's palace could indeed have a group of effective forces, but it also needed to gain a foothold in Tiannan. Xianyuan City was far from enough. There was also Ningbian, which was occupied by the Freedom Corps in the rear. There was also a joint city of various forces, Heaven Capital of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, and Flame City, which was occupied by the Burning Corps in the southernmost part of Tiannan. 5 cities, the entire Tiannan. This also meant the administrative strength of the 5 cities, as well as all kinds of talents in other aspects. At present, when Xianyuan City was not perfect enough, Li Tianlan's scalp tingled at the thought of other cities. And the best solution was undoubtedly for Emperor Dong's palace to unify Tiannan as soon as possible and completely convince Annan in the south. Then, Emperor Dong's palace would announce that Tiannan would return to Zhongzhou State and become Tiannan Province of Zhongzhou State. In this way, the forces in all aspects could be quickly replenished. But the premise of all this was to ensure the stability of Tiannan. And what Li Tianlan lacked at present was the administrative strength to stabilize Tiannan. If it really doesn't work, can I continue to borrow people from my parents? Qin Weibai blinked her eyes. It's hard for them too. Li Tianlan said helplessly. And they're not very useful. Nowadays, some people in Xianyuan City were drawn from the territory of the giant group. But under the situation that the giant group maintained its own stability, it was impossible to replenish the forces in all aspects of Tiannan all at once. Moreover, the conditions of Emperor Dong's palace for recruiting people were extremely harsh. They didn't want those who had just started working and had no experience. They also didn't want those who had been working for a few years, because they were also not very useful. What they wanted were those who were serious and responsible. That was the real talent. How many of such people could there be? If they really gave too many, the Dongqing clan wouldn't say anything, but the other wealthy families of the giant group would be the first to make trouble. There will always be a solution. Qin Weibai said with a smile. At least in Tiandu City, we can put up a framework and barely maintain it. In recent years, Li Guangtu has been very xenophobic, and there are very few aborigines there. If it doesn't work, we can transfer some elites of the Freedom Corps there. If there really is trouble, we don't have to worry that we can't suppress it. It's not long enough, but that's all we can do. Li Tianlan nodded. Qin Weibai put her arms around Li Tianlan's neck, and her eyes flickered. She looked thoughtfully at the Mercedes-Benz that was about to leave Emperor Dong's palace. Emperor Dong's palace now lacked a lot of talents, especially talents in the field of administrative justice. And it just so happened that Qin Weibai knew that there was a top talent in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, who could even replace military counselor to some extent. The Li family Li Huazhang, the superior of the invincible realm who was killed by Li Dongqing in Holy Emperor Palace in another time and space. And in Dongqing Huangtu's time, his existence could definitely be said to be Emperor Dong's right-hand man. At that time, Han Donglu was in charge of all the business affairs of Emperor Dong's palace. And Li Huazhang's role was more like the chief administrative officer of Emperor Dong's palace. Qin Weibai didn't like the only person in the Li family who could be regarded as Li Guangtu's peer. But she didn't deny his loyalty. But his loyalty was not to Emperor Dong's palace or to the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, but to the Li family. So in another time and space he could mix well in Emperor Dong's palace and the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. At that time, whether it was Dongqing Huangtu or Emperor Huawu, they might not like this little uncle, but they could completely trust his position. Time and space intertwined. Li Huazhang still existed. Emperor Dong's palace now completely suppressed the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, so Qin Weibai was 100% sure that she could invite him to Emperor Dong's palace. And it was certain that as long as Emperor Dong's palace still maintained its suppression of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, there was no possibility of Li Huazhang's betrayal, and he would do his best to plan for the future of Emperor Dong's palace. If he was willing to come, Li Tianlan would have another military counselor. Let's not talk about the long future. At least for now, Li Huazhang could solve most of the problems in Heaven Capital that Li Tianlan was worried about. FPZW Chapter 1285. There is someone in the purgatory of heaven capital. Tianlan, you still have to pay attention to him. Qin Weibai thought for a while and said softly. Who? Li Tianlan kept breathing. His mouth and nose were full of the scent that made him feel at ease and nostalgia. In this state, Li Tianlan felt like a salted fish. All he wanted to do was to sink into the land of warmth and tenderness. He had no ambition or motivation to work hard. Li Huazhang. Qin Weibai's eyebrows twitched slightly, but she still said the name in the end. She didn't like this person very much, but for the current Emperor Dong's palace, he was indeed a very useful person. During the Li family's heyday, he was a core member and played the role of a strategist for the Li family. There was no doubt about his ability. Moreover, in another time and space his level in all aspects had been personally tested by Li Tianlan, but now Li Tianlan didn't know it. Li Huazhang was now a senior staff officer in the purgatory of heaven capital. He was the core, but his position in the core was relatively marginal. His personal relationship with Li Guangtu was not good, so he got such a role that was valued but not put in an important position. If he joined Emperor Dong's palace, he could establish a certain order in a city by himself. If he had a good team, Li Huazhang could completely stabilize half of Tiannan. And birds of a feather flock together. The Li family's position on Li Huazhang was obvious. Now that he was in the purgatory of heaven capital, the people who could walk with him basically had the same position as him. And as the only person in the Li family who could be compared with Li Guangtu in terms of seniority, his potential influence was great. There was a very interesting phenomenon in the Li family as a whole. With the death of Li Honghe, Emperor Dong's palace and the purgatory of heaven capital coexisted in the dark world. The division and opposition of the Li family had become extremely obvious. In the eyes of the Li family, the old people around Li Tianlan were more loyal to Li Honghe than to Li Guangtu. For example, Yu Donglai, the poison doctor, was one of Li Honghe's sacred guards. Fireman, known as the strongest expert in the fire-flaming realm. Li Tianying, who once controlled the largest special force in Zhongzhou State. Today, the Ministry of Security of Zhongzhou State was Evergreen Leaf. Tianying now controlled most of the intelligence agencies in Emperor Dong's palace. And Situt Songyue, the hidden god of Zhongzhou State, who was cultivated by Li Honghe. These were all people who carried out Li Honghe's will and stood firmly by Li Tianlan's side. Although there were not as many people in the purgatory of heaven capital, in terms of personal ability, they really made everyone speechless. The people standing next to Li Guangtu were those who were more loyal to Li Guangtu than to Li Honghe in the Li family. Daybreak, dawn, phoenix, and Buddha. Li Mountain E and sect. In fact, there Li and more, Li, that was the former power of the Li family. And the Li Dong, Li, the Li family, Li family, Li. With the fall of the Li family, the Southeast group also suffered a great loss. A large number of core personnel were purged, and the Southeast group fell from the ranks of the only supergroup, and became a first-tier group similar to the Prince group. Among these people, their fates were also different. Some left the scene dejectedly, some pretended to be courteous, some hid their tails between their legs and lived an ignoble existence, and some stubbornly fought to the end. Different people had different approaches. This group was so big that the Wang family of Beihai couldn't completely clean it up. They couldn't find many people, and even if they did, they could only turn a blind eye to it. Naturally, there were some people who were on Li Tianlan's side. There were two representative figures. The first one was Wu Jingmin. At that time, Li Honghe seized the opportunity to enter Jiangxia directly, held Jiangxia in his hands again, and completely handed the future of Jiangxia to Li Tianlan. With Wu Jingmin as their leader, Jiangxia propped up the embryonic form of the new group. Nowadays, there was basically no one in Jiangxia who was loyal to Li Guangtu. As long as Wu Jingmin's position did not change, the position of the senior management of Jiangxia would not change. Even if Li Guangtu wanted to intervene, there was no chance. Another representative figure was Li Tianlan's current neighbor, Ning Ziyuan, the commander of the Freedom Corps in Ningbian city of Tiannan. He was also the person who was firmly on Li Tianlan's side. The number of people in the Freedom Corps had expanded to 50,000. These 50,000 people could be mobilized by Li Tianlan at will to stabilize the fighting force of Tiannan. Now many people had discussed in private that if Tiannan really fell into the hands of Emperor Dong's palace in the future, this place would become the foundation of Emperor Dong's palace. Excluding Li Tianlan, the Ning family might become the richest family in Tiannan in the future, because to some extent, Ning Ziyuan and Ning Qianqing controlled all the official affairs and monarchical affairs of Tiannan. There were not many of them, but each of them could fight against 10 elders of the Li family, the entire Jiangxia, the entire Freedom Corps. These were the 3 gifts that Li Honghe left for Li Tianlan, and Li Tianlan could completely control them. In addition, the other official forces of the Li family, those who were suppressed, purged, and still dormant, mostly followed Li Guangtu in the past, intending to replace the Wang family of Beihai. Now there was no need to say more about their positions. Judging from the current situation, the difference between Emperor Dong's palace and the purgatory of heaven capital was obvious. At this time, if Li Huazhang joined Emperor Dong's palace in a high profile, Emperor Dong's palace would have more than a few talents like Li Huazhang. He could even use his identity and seniority to persuade these forces that were still standing by Li Guangtu's side with the general trend of Emperor Dong's palace. It was hard to say how much he would gain, but he would definitely gain something. As long as Li Huazhang was given enough time, he could even build a channel of talent transfer for Emperor Dong's palace alone. The most important thing was, Qin Weibai's current spiritual power had officially entered the transcendent realm. Standing at this height, she could not enslave other people's souls, but she could already change the cognition of many people quietly. Why was the Saint Emperor in the Holy Land so terrifying? Because as long as he saw his goal, he could change the target into what he wanted to see. Spirit, thinking, cognition, and faith. Under the shroud of the mental storm, as long as he was willing, he could completely change a person into someone else without him even realizing it. And such a modification was often more terrifying than the pure lethality of martial arts. And what the Saint Emperor could do. Now Qin Weibai also had the qualification to try. She did not intend to change Li Huazhang into another person. But through spiritual suggestion, she could change his loyalty from the Li family to Li Tianlan, and constantly strengthen this kind of thinking. At this point, Qin Weibai could already do it. Li Huazhang. Li Tianlan muttered this name to himself, his eyes very calm. He had always known this name, but this morning when his real body arrived at the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, he really met this little uncle, and his attitude made Li Tianlan quite surprised. Obviously, in the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, the little uncle did not support Li Guangtu, but stood firmly on his side. If he is willing to come to Emperor Dong's palace, we can let him be the mayor of Heaven capital. Qin Weibai did not say other benefits. Li Tianlan would find out eventually, so it did not make much sense to say it. Letting Li Huazhang be the mayor of Heaven capital seemed to be the most practical at present. Tianlan, you can go to the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven capital again, and bring Li Huazhang here before they leave. This person is not loyal to Li Guangtu. It can be seen that he is a little embarrassed in the Purgatory of Heaven capital. It is said that he is not on good terms with Li Guangtu. If you go in person, he will have a great chance to go with you, because you are the patriarch of the Li family, and Li Huazhang does not value the rise and fall of the Purgatory of Heaven capital and Emperor Dong's palace. What he values most is the future of the Li family. Even in his heart, as long as the Li family is still there, it doesn't matter what happens to the Purgatory of Heaven capital and Emperor Dong's palace. I know him, Li Tianlan said faintly. I don't need to go there. This person, he will come in a few days. After a pause, he continued. It is estimated that some people from the Purgatory of Heaven capital will come in these days. Let's make a unified arrangement then. When he left the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, he gave the Purgatory of Heaven capital 3 days. Just like giving Li Guangtu a chance. Someone in the Purgatory of Heaven capital said something about his background, and he officially announced who the next heir of the Li family would be. This was the most powerful response and the best Li Tianlan could do. Let his and Dongqing Rushi's future child inherit the Li family, and the child's surname would still be Li. Li Tianlan could not do anything else. It was impossible to really welcome Li Guangtu and the others into Emperor Dong's palace, and let Li Guangtu control everything in Emperor Dong's palace. There were many people in the purgatory of heaven capital who had many thoughts. Some were on his side, some supported Li Guangtu, and some were wavering. Li Tianlan did not know who would come to Emperor Dong's palace to report in 3 days. He had given all the conditions that should be given. To be honest, even if those people did not accept it, Li Tianlan could understand. But understanding was understanding. Those who did not come in 3 days were enemies. Li Tianlan never had the habit of showing mercy to his enemies. "I've given them 3 days," Li Tianlan whispered. "I told them that when Rushi wakes up, our child will be surnamed Li, and this child will inherit the Li family." He put his arms around Qin Weibai's slender waist and whispered, "Do you feel wronged?" "No, I don't." Qin Weibai shook her head and wiggled her calves on Li Tianlan's body. "Fighting for the family property is too cliché. And it's just a Li family. Not to mention the future, even now, what you have is more than just a Li family. If you and Rushi have a child, he will inherit the Li family in the future. If we have a child in the future, he will naturally inherit what he should inherit. And we don't even have a child. It's not certain if we will separate from the family. You think too much." Li Tianlan smiled and reached out to pinch Qin Weibai's plump buttocks. "When are you going to leave?" Qin Weibai said that when Li Huaqing's affairs were solved, she should return to the Lin clan. "I should have left today." Qin Weibai glared at him a little charming. She reached out and slapped away Li Tianlan's dishonest paws. "Wait a little longer. 3 days later. I am also very curious about whether people from the purgatory of heaven capital will come, and how many people will come. After satisfying my curiosity, I will leave. Why do you think I am annoying? I haven't finished tearing the stockings. How can you be annoying?" Li Tianlan shook his head solemnly. "Rope." Qin Weibai glared at him with a red face. Li Tianlan stretched and said with a smile, "White and black tonight." Qin Weibai snorted softly and stood up. She leaned over the railing of the balcony and looked at the scenery in the distance. Li Tianlan sat casually, admiring her back. She was so close to him, so exquisite. "Is there anything else we need to do before the election?" Qin Weibai asked. "Whatever." Li Tianlan shook his head. "Let them do whatever they want. It has nothing to do with us." Including Huiting, Qin Weibai laughed. The situation in Zhongzhou State was almost white-hot. The crisis in Liaodong had not been settled yet. Wang Xiaoyao returned to Zhongzhou State this time, and set off an extremely violent storm in Huiting. The Southeast Group and the Prince Group were all involved. Wu Yue and Huiting became the new focus of Zhongzhou State. In the next less than a year, Zhongzhou State would only become more and more lively. If the new group wanted to get involved, it might be profitable if it operated well. Including Huiting. Li Tianlan nodded. "In fact, at this time we have already done a lot of things without doing anything." Qin Weibai tilted her head and thought for a moment. She said softly, "It makes sense." When she tilted her head, a strand of black hair fell from her ear, and was blown up by the slightly cold wind in Emperor Dong's palace. It seemed to glow with a faint golden light in the sun. Li Tianlan looked at her quietly. She looked at his Emperor Dong's palace. He was looking at her. This was the most beautiful scenery he had ever seen in his life. "Can you suppress the matter of the Lin clan?" Li Tianlan asked softly. Qin Weibai turned around and looked at him with some doubts. "I'm used to having you around." Li Tianlan stood up and walked behind her. He held her body in his arms and lowered his head to gently bite her neck. "I'm a little reluctant to leave you." Qin Weibai seemed to be a little ticklish. She twisted her body and giggled. "What can I do if I stay? Stay at home with you every day and be bullied by you? We can go out for a walk." Li Tianlan said softly. "In a few days I plan to go to East Island in America. There are also a lot of people in Zhongzhou State that I want to meet. I have to go to many places. Without you, I always feel that something is missing. Let's go and have a look together. It can also be regarded as a vacation. Anyway, we're not in a hurry. We can stay for a while wherever we like." Is this the mentality of a man showing off his achievements to his spouse? Qin Weibai rubbed Li Tianlan's face with her head. "I guess so," Li Tianlan said with some uncertainty. Or is it the mentality of a man who wants to show off his wife's beauty and let everyone see it and enjoy being envied? Qin Weibai continued to laugh. I guess so. Li Tianlan laughed. I'm going to take you with me. Wherever I can influence. I should remember the appearance of the hostess of Emperor Dong's palace. He kissed Qin Weibai's face. Do you want me to go to Europe with you first? Since there may be a problem with the European branch of the Lin clan, it's good to go with you. After the problem is solved, you don't have to leave. Zhongzhou state really doesn't care anymore. Qin Weibai said softly. I'll just watch the fun. Li Tianlan said blandly. It's already the limit for the new group to have the current scale. It's not a good thing to be too greedy. They can do whatever they want. As long as I don't take action, they won't provoke me. After the election, the new situation is our stage. The Academy, the North, the Crown Prince, the Southeast, the Special Warfare Group, the wealthy families, and the new group. The pattern of the 7 groups had been determined. The new group had gained a lot. Even if Li Tianlan continued to go out and stir up trouble, the gains would be limited and meaningless. The goal of the giant group was very clear. It was to ensure that Dongqing Wudi would be re-elected and complete the internal reshuffle at the same time, and to help Li Tianlan stabilize and digest the interests of the new group to the greatest extent. Liaodong had been lively. Next, the case in Liaodong would cool down. Both the new group and the giant group could stay out of it and readjust their internal structure. And the Special Warfare Group would face an extremely severe test next. Because Li Tianlan's position had been determined. The special advisor of Zhongzhou State and the war god of Zhongzhou State. The supreme leader of the Special Warfare System was not a member of the Special Warfare Group. It was estimated that now, whether it was Gu Xingyun, Jiang Shangyu or Li Guangtu, they were all in a dilemma. After the election, they would work under the pressure of Dong Huang. How to integrate their own forces was the top priority at the moment. Now they would be thankful if they could not be affected by the chaos, let alone participate in the next battle. Therefore, with the dominance of Huading and Wuyue as the center, the entire Zhongzhou state would become the battlefield between the Prince Group and the Southeast Group. The academics would mediate between the two sides, and the North Group would sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight, looking for opportunities. In less than a year, tit-for-tat and intrigue against each other would be very lively. Li Tianlan would just wait and see. There was really no need to intervene. Contact the route in Nanyin. We can go to Europe now, Li Tianlan said. Forget it. Qin Weibai thought for a moment. Later I'll have a video conference with them. Let's delay it for a while. I'm not leaving. Li Tianlan said with a smile. It's up to you. Qin Weibai narrowed her eyes and whispered. Good girl. Li Tianlan clenched his hands. Qin Weibai closed her eyes and leaned in Li Tianlan's arms. The corners of her mouth rose slightly. I feel that you're starting to like me again. When did I not like you? Li Tianlan was stunned. There's something wrong with you these days. Sometimes you hide from me and rarely touch me when you sleep. You used to like to hold me when you sleep. Even if you fall asleep, you don't let me go. But these days, you've been sleeping with your back to me. Qin Weibai pouted and was a little angry. I thought you were tired of me. I've never been tired of you. Li Tianlan responded seriously, and then frowned. A few days ago, I was a little strange. I've been imagining things. I always have a feeling that you're not you. And then, Qin Weibai tried to calm herself down and asked with a smile. I'm just imagining things. You're still you. There's no then. Li Tianlan laughed. You're always unique. Qin Weibai turned around from Li Tianlan's arms and put her arms around his neck. She said with a faint smile, You've learned how to say sweet words. You've made progress. She leaned close to Li Tianlan's ear and whispered, I'll reward you tonight. Then I'll choose black silk stockings tonight, Li Tianlan said with a smile. She rolled her eyes at Li Tianlan, nodded, and said yes. And that pair of silver high-heeled shoes, the brightest pair. That red silk scarf is also good. Damn Hermes, I want that too. And that earring that you said is an antique, I want that too. Why don't you say anything? Li Tianlan glanced at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai, who had already imagined that image of herself, blushed and said shamefully, As you wish. Okay. Li Tianlong nodded, very satisfied. What about clothes? What kind? Qin Weibai asked. Li Tianlong looked confused and said innocently, What clothes? Qin Weibai clenched her fist and hammered Li Tianlong, saying with hatred, Rogue. In the spacious and comfortable back row, Li Guangtu looked back for the third time, and the Emperor Dong's palace in his sight had become a little blurred. Li Huaxing, who had been paying attention to Li Guangtu, suddenly smiled and joked. Why do you live here? Do you have feelings for living here? Do you suddenly feel reluctant to leave? Li Guangtu, who looked calm, shook his head and frowned thoughtfully. What are you thinking about? The back row baffle was put down, and Li Huaxing's tone also seemed a little careless. If you plan to take revenge on the Emperor Dong's palace now, I advise you to give up this idea. At least, you have to wait until your injury is better. If you take action now, it's no different from hitting a stone with an egg, and it's meaningless. Hitting a stone with an egg. Hitting a stone with an egg, Li Guangtu muttered to himself, and his eyes became more and more confused. Li Huaxing frowned and also fell silent. He quietly looked at the super expert who was about to become the commander of the Purgatory Legion of Zhongzhou State. His eyes calm and deep. Li Guangtu suddenly came to his senses and smiled apologetically. Sorry, I'm a little tired, and my spirit is not very good. I can take what you said as true, Li Huaxing said slowly. But, are you sure this is what you want to say? If you have any future troubles for the Emperor Dong's palace now, it's still not too late. No, Li Guangtu shook his head. It's not a future trouble, but I feel that there seems to be something that I didn't bring back from there. What is it? Li Huaxing narrowed his eyes. Both of them were lost in thought at the same time, and they were thinking about the same problem. As a captive, Li Guangtu must have had nothing when he was in the Emperor Dong's palace. What could he have not brought back? It couldn't be that he was reluctant to give up the cigarettes and wine that the Emperor Dong's palace provided him when he was a captive. I forgot. Li Guangtu took a deep breath and said in a hoarse voice. I seem to have forgotten a very important thing. The black car was driving on the street of Xianyuan City, and it was smooth. You can think about it slowly. Li Huaxing patted him on the shoulder. Is it a person, something, or something specific? It's, Li Guangtu's eyes were confused and he murmured, It's a dream. Chapter 1286. After lunch, Li Tianlong didn't continue to be with Qin Weibai. The young Donghuang, who had reached the top of the divine list, was rarely diligent. He planned to look through the materials that he hadn't read since military counselor sent them over. The materials were passed from different people one by one, gathered and sorted out by military counselor, and then placed on Li Tianlong's seemingly ordinary desk, which actually had an extraordinary origin. Li Tianlong's desk had many functions. For example, eating, watching movies, playing games. Sometimes, when Li Tianlong was in a good mood, it would even become a battlefield for him to conquer Qin Weibai. But the desk was never used for work. All kinds of materials would be thrown into an alloy safe when they arrived here, and never see the light of day. When he wanted to take them out, he found that he even forgot the password of the safe. Qin Weibai told him the password. Then she watched Li Tianlong take out stack after stack of materials, and read them carefully. All kinds of materials covered a wide range of fields. Countless industries under the Flourishing Age Fund were exposed and still hidden under this iceberg. Some were the resumes of some important figures of the new group, their ideas of Zhengzhi, some advantages and disadvantages, and future development directions after the analysis of the think tank of Emperor Dong's palace, and the various nodes of the constantly expanding intelligence organization of Emperor Dong's palace. The new group would officially appear in the vision of everyone in Zhongzhou State after the election. Jiangxia, Dongshan, Nanyue, and Xia would all become the traditional sphere of influence of the new group. In the cabinet, Wu Jingmin and Bai Qingqian were also enough to raise a flag. In addition, there was the Ministry of Security that Qingye now controlled. What kind of investment plan should the Flourishing Age Fund have in these provinces? How large the investment? Which groups or wealthy families should cooperate with? Who should be supported, this group, or even other groups? And how to maximize the various resources in the new group to carry out the most reasonable expansion. In addition, There was the think tank's external expansion strategy after referring to the opinions of Zhongzhou State. The detailed situation of each city in Tiannan, a lot of materials, in different aspects, explained one thing. That was, Emperor Dong's palace should completely integrate into the dark world as soon as possible. And the new group should completely integrate into Zhongzhou State as soon as possible. In the world of Zhengji, there was no clear friend or foe, let alone good or bad. Therefore, in most cases, there should not be clear likes and dislikes. Balance and stability were always the most important. The new group was like the sun in the sky, but such momentum could not be maintained forever. No group would welcome a team that was independent of them, because it meant that there was no balance, and if there was no balance, it meant instability. Therefore, the new group had to approach other groups from different fields, and in line with their own interests. They cooperated in various aspects and fields, and supported some people with different standpoints but similar ideologies to rise to power. Most of the time, these things could become the foundation of one's standing, and they could also be used as weapons to attack the enemy. It was the same for all the major groups. Even when the Southeast Group and the Prince Group were almost at each other's throats, the cooperation between the two groups in some aspects had never stopped. Only by thoroughly integrating into each other could the new group truly stabilize its foundation. The relationship between Emperor Dong's palace and the Dark World was, to some extent, the relationship between the new group and Zhongzhou State. Li Tianlan looked at it seriously. There were more and more documents on the table. The A4 papers were densely packed with words, all kinds of complicated and boring data. And there were no F*King illustrations. Li Tianlan naturally had a bad headache, but he didn't say much and just gnawed at the documents little by little. There was no doubt about the tenacity of a person who could insist on swinging his sword and sheathing it tens of thousands of times a day, regardless of rain or shine. He didn't read it before because he was lazy, but now that he had made up his mind to do something, Li Tianlan couldn't persuade himself to give up. Instead, he was more serious than anyone else. In his words, he was looking at his assets, and the happiness was second only to the time when he was lying on Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai stayed by Li Tianlan's side obediently, smiling. Occasionally, she lit a cigarette for Li Tianlan, helped him look through the documents, or stood behind him and massaged his shoulders and neck. She made a plate of small desserts and squeezed juice for Li Tianlan. It seemed that she was busier than Li Tianlan. It was nearly 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Seeing that Li Tianlan was completely immersed in a lot of documents, Qin Weibai quietly left Li Tianlan's office. She went out of the corridor and got off the elevator. She left the castle. She walked quietly in her own home, like a scenery. A large number of staff and guards came and went in Emperor Dong's palace. Everyone would subconsciously slow down when they saw her. She and Li Tianlan were not married yet, but everyone called her Madam. She could see the awe and admiration in the eyes of those guards, and also the envy and a trace of jealousy in the eyes of those women who worked in Emperor Dong's palace. They wanted to be jealous but couldn't. Samsara Palace had become Emperor Dong's palace, just as Qin Weibai had said at the beginning. She had changed from the palace master's sister to the palace master's woman. Conspiracies, schemes, strategizing. These were things she was good at. But they were not what she liked. She liked this kind of life now. She liked today's morning and afternoon. She liked Li Tianlan holding her in his arms and watching the scenery. She liked accompanying him to do some small things when he was working. This feeling was peaceful and satisfying. It seemed that she would never get tired of it. She stood on the huge fountain square in front of the castle, watching the water column rise into the sky and the torrent. The wind that blew past her ears was mixed with the subtle sword qi, with the smell of flowers and grass. She walked and stopped until a very beautiful building appeared in front of her. The main body of the European-style single-family villa was white. It was located in the garden area of Emperor Dong's palace, surrounded by flowers of various colors. There was a small forest on the periphery. In front of the villa, there was a small arch bridge at the bottom of the lake. The water under the bridge was clear, and the fish were flowing toward the artificial lake of Emperor Dong's palace. This was almost in the center of Emperor Dong's palace, but it seemed to be completely isolated from the whole Emperor Dong's palace. The inside and outside of the forest were completely different. It was quiet, leisurely, and peaceful. Qin Weibai was a little confused. She didn't know why she came to this place inexplicably. She naturally knew about this place, but she had never been here before. In the whole Emperor Dong's palace, this was the only place that dared to hang Li Tianlan's name outside. Tianlan Clinic. At first, Xianyuan Wushang planned to name it Tianlan Clinic or Little Tianlan Clinic. Qin Weibai, who knew that Li Tianlan was not little at all, felt that Xianyuan Wushang was implying something about her, so she forcibly removed the word little from the name. A clinic that dared to openly mock Emperor Dong naturally attracted a lot of attention, so it was usually very lively. Of course, the so-called lively was only relative. Most of the people who could enter Emperor Dong's palace had entered the 4 realms of martial arts and were healthy. Even some of the middle and senior executives of the Flourishing Age Fund were successful people who paid attention to their health. It was completely rare for them to get sick. So it could only be said that the private hospital inside Emperor Dong's palace was more deserted, and there were basically no people in the clinic. After the establishment of the clinic, in Qin Weibai's memory, it seemed that she had never seen this fat man again. Oh no, she saw him once. It was when he reached out to Li Tianlan for money. The money was not much, less than 10 million yuan. Then, this damn fatty bought almost a warehouse full of coke, which almost filled up most of the wards in his clinic. The rest of the money was random drugs that he probably didn't even know what they were used for. Then he used the remaining millions of yuan to play the game. His whole body was covered in godly equipment. He led a befuddled life. He really led a befuddled life. After that, Qin Weibai didn't even hear that Xianyuan Wushang went out. Qin Weibai hesitated for a moment and stepped forward. She walked across the bridge and passed by the garden. After all, it was a clinic. The door was closed, so Qin Weibai went straight in. The inside of the clinic was surprisingly clean and tidy, unlike the usual den of a fat otaku. Xianyuan Wushang was sitting in front of the computer with his back to Qin Weibai, cursing, "That's the assassin. He's killed me twice. Focus fire and kill him in one wave. Knight, be invincible. Ahaha, watch me fight 7 to 7. Where's the priest? Add. Open the boss, open the boss. Damn it, what's there to be afraid of? Open it. He stared at the screen, casually picked up a large bottle of coke from beside him, and raised his head. Qin Weibai saw with her own eyes that the large bottle of coke was reduced by more than half in an instant. He fumbled on the table with his other hand for a long time, but to no avail. He roared, "Xing Tian, get 2 cartons of cigarettes. Quick, fire support." Qin Weibai watched silently for a while, and suddenly understood why she came here. Some questions that had been completely suppressed in her mind resurfaced when her heart was the most relaxed. She subconsciously came here, thinking that Xianyuan Wushang could give her an answer. Qin Weibai coughed softly. Xianyuan Wushang, who was busy commanding the instance dungeon again, didn't notice it for a moment. Qin Weibai said helplessly, "When the patient dies behind you, won't you notice that the body is cold?" Xianyuan Wushang's chubby body suddenly shook, and he turned around in astonishment. Then he stood up instinctively. "Ahaha, sister-in-law is here. Sit. He casually turned off the computer, picked up a new bottle of coke with a hollow smile, and poured a cup for Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai was silent for 2 seconds. "Don't you even have water here?" "No," Xianyuan Wushang said righteously. "I don't like to drink it." This was a clinic that provided coke to patients for free. No matter what was wrong with you, have a large cup of coke to calm down first. Qin Weibai didn't touch the coke in front of her. This kind of carbonated drink had a great impact on the body and skin, and it was completely her natural enemy. She had never touched it in her previous life or this life. "I heard from Tianlan that Xing Tian recently asked for a leave, and specially asked for a quiet room. Is he playing games with you?" Qin Weibai asked. She hadn't seen Xianyuan Wushang during this time, but she had seen Xing Tian several times. Xing Tian was one of the guards of Emperor Dong's palace now. His figure was too conspicuous, and sometimes he could be recognized at a glance, even if he was far away. "Ah, he's not playing games. He's busy recently," Xianyuan Wushang said with a smile. but he can hear me calling him here. He should be going to get me a cigarette now. Xianyuan Wushang lived a leisurely life. But Xing Tian had been carrying out the task given to him by Xianyuan Wushang. He was looking for Wang Yuetong. With limited clues and the possibility of being deceived, the first thing Xing Tian wanted to find was the eldest princess in the time corridor. As long as the eldest princess felt the trace of Xing Tian searching for her, her will would come to Tiannan immediately. At that time, he could directly ask the eldest princess where Wang Yuetong was. However, this was obviously a rather difficult task. Fortunately, the eldest princess was an ally. If she was a top figure in a hostile state, it would be completely impossible for Xing Tian to find her. It was even possible that he would be cheated of his life unknowingly. Qin Weibai took a deep look at him and didn't say much. Seeing that Qin Weibai had no intention of drinking water, Xianyuan Wushang took the coke in front of her and took a sip. He asked curiously, "Sister-in-law, are you not feeling well?" As he spoke, his eyes involuntarily glanced at the computer that had just been turned off. It seemed that he was still thinking about the instance dungeon that he had just started. Qin Weibai pretended not to see Xianyuan Wushang's absent-mindedness and said blandly, "I just saw a man in the biological laboratory." Ah. Xianyuan Wushang looked confused. "I forgot what he looked like." Qin Weibai frowned. But he seemed to be seriously injured. It was the kind of injury that seemed to be getting injured every minute and second. "I saw with my own eyes that his wounds were torn and healed." Her thoughts began to become clear, and she was completely sure that Xianyuan Wushang must have some clues. She thought of the movie she had seen. The space-time she saw. Why did she come to find Xianyuan Wushang? It was not because of the various strange states that Xianyuan Wushang showed when he saved Li Tianlan. The main reason was that she saw Xianyuan Wushang suddenly appear on the surface of Beihai in the fast-forward scene of another space-time. He stood with Li Dongcheng and seemed to say something. Xianyuan Wushang at that time was exactly the same as he was now. What did this mean? Looking at the movie from the perspective of this space-time, it was difficult to tell whether what happened in the movie was in the past or in the past. But the key age should not be wrong. When Qin Weibai saw Xianyuan Wushang in the movie, Li Dongcheng was already 40 years old, but Xianyuan Wushang was still a young man. If that Xianyuan Wushang belonged to that space-time, he should be at least 70 years old based on his current age. But the Xianyuan Wushang she saw was still the same as now. He suddenly appeared and disappeared. Did this prove that the Xianyuan Wushang in the movie she had seen was the fat man in front of her? Could he go directly from this space-time to that space-time? It sounded incredible. But this seemed to be the only explanation. If Xianyuan Wushang could do it, then what was his relationship with the man who had invited her and Li Guangtu to watch a movie? That was why she came to this clinic. Here, she might be able to find some crucial clues, or even directly find the answer. Xianyuan Wushang's pupils suddenly contracted. All his absent-mindedness seemed to vanish in that instant. "You're injured every second?" Xianyuan Wushang looked at Qin Weibai seriously. "It's not just injuries." Qin Weibai shook her head. "And it's still healing. I saw it with my own eyes." His skin seemed to be torn by something, but before I could see it clearly, the wound on his body had already healed. Xianyuan Wushang was silent for a long time before he lowered his voice and slowly said, "Where was he injured?" "My entire body." Qin Weibai frowned and said, "That should be the case. What I saw was that there was a mist of blood all over his body, but all the wounds were healing. Then they were torn again and healed again." Xianyuan Wushang said nothing. He took his place. His face was calm. "Biological laboratory," he whispered to himself and suddenly asked, "Where is he?" "I don't know," Qin Weibai calmly said. "He invited me and Li Guangtu to watch a movie, and then disappeared." "A movie?" Xianyuan Wushang was a little hesitant. Qin Weibai's voice became calmer and calmer. "It's a movie about my son and Tianlan's." In this space-time, Qin Weibai was not pregnant. But she talked about her son. Xianyuan Wushang's heart suddenly shook, and there seemed to be a flash of light in his mind. Vaguely, he seemed to see the context of something. He hesitated for a moment and slowly said, "Sister-in-law, did you see Dongqing?" Qin Weibai's eyes suddenly lit up. She stared at Xianyuan Wushang and said, In the movie, the person who appeared on the surface of Beihai was indeed you. On the surface of Beihai, Xianyuan Wushang thought for a moment. It should be the time when he accidentally borrowed the space-time of the master of Samsara Palace to go to the War God realm, and met Xianyuan Luanhui. Xianyuan Wushang nodded and said, "It was me, but I stayed there for a short time. Dongqing's condition seems to be very bad. Can you still be in the past?" Qin Weibai was a little excited. If Xianyuan Wushang could go there, Qin Weibai would very much like to be with Li Tianlan. What would it be like to have a father-son exchange between the two generations of heavenly sons? "Sister-in-law, you think too highly of me." Xianyuan Wushang smiled bitterly. "That time was completely an accident. I could go there because the other you inadvertently helped me. Otherwise, I could only use the stupid method, and this stupid method can only be used by me. Neither you nor my brother can use it. The so-called stupid method. It was to leave Miracle City with his consciousness, reach the edge of the crisscrossing space-time through the node of the quantum network, and enter the area of the War God realm and the Emperor Palace from there. Such a method, such a long distance, Qin Weibai and Li Tianlan did not even think about it. That person should be able to do it, right?" Qin Weibai's eyes were in a trance. Xianyuan Wushang curled his lips. "Of course he can do it, but he can't do it. However, it's impossible for me to do so. I'm afraid I have no choice but to invite you over." "What do you mean?" Qin Weibai's eyes slightly narrowed. Xianyuan Wushang did not explain. In fact, he had already explained. Li Dongqing was in a bad state. In fact, neither the human emperor of the Emperor Palace, nor the war god of the War God realm valued the current Wang family of Beihai too much. He met Li Dongqing that time, just when Li Dongqing destroyed Beihai, and he also met Xianyuan Luanhui, the first disciple of the War God, who is now known as the first celestial expert in the starry sky. Xianyuan Luanhui did not stop Li Dongqing for the Wang family of Beihai. It was for Li Dongqing himself. Hatred had become Li Dongqing's obsession, and it could even be said that it was all his motivation to live. If the Wang family of Beihai completely disappeared in that space-time, then there would really be nothing left in the life of the Sword God. Self-destruction was the only way for him. Xianyuan Wushang did not know what the end of the Wang family of Beihai in that space-time was. But the War God realm sent someone to invite Qin Weibai over. Obviously, Li Dongqing should have lost his obsession and was in a bad state. They wanted to give Li Dongqing a new way and rekindle his life. If Qin Weibai had completed the task, then before the Li family returned to the peak, they would not have many opportunities to meet. How much did the War God and the human emperor value the Sword God? The first disciple of the War God personally appeared to escort him. In the Supreme Hall, the War God personally met the great Emperor Xianyuan, and even wanted to betroth the palace master to Li Dongqing. The sixth princess of the War God realm could be said to be as famous as Lin Shi. In some aspects, she was even more superior than Lin Shi. She married Li Dongqing. At this stage, it was a real marriage. Even if Li Dongqing really reached the peak, the sixth princess could not be regarded as a social climber. The War God realm did all this just to keep the Sword God in the War God realm. They wanted to rob the Sword God from the space-time corridor. How could they let Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai go to see him again? At least they had to wait until the Sword God and the sixth princess made love, or even bore fruit. At this stage, for the space-time corridor, leaving the Sword God in the War God realm was also the best choice, because most of the resources of the space-time corridor would be tilted to Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai. Staying there, the Sword God could grow better. If there is a chance, we will meet again. Xianyuan Wushang looked at Qin Weibai and comforted her. Qin Weibai was silent for a while and said lightly, "I just want to know who invited me to the movie." "Well, I didn't see him." Xianyuan Wushang smiled bitterly and said, "How would I know if I didn't see him?" He picked up the Coke and took a sip. That person was wearing a black dragon robe. Puff. Cough, 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 cough. Xianyuan Wushang spat out the Coke and coughed violently. "Are you sure?" He looked at Qin Weibai and asked, "It should be the dragon robe. That dress is more fancy than Wu Qing's. The pattern keeps changing." Qin Weibai pondered. "World Punisher. No, all worlds, Xianyuan Wushang said softly. What? Qin Weibai asked. Nothing. Xianyuan Wushang responded subconsciously. Qin Weibai narrowed her eyes and said coldly. Who was it? Tell me. Xianyuan Wushang moved his lips and couldn't help but smile bitterly. He thought the person who invited Qin Weibai to the movie was just a core member of the Imperial Palace, or the War God realm. He didn't expect it to be that black dragon robe. It was so easy to recognize. There were only 2 people who could wear dragon robes in that space and time. Obviously, the human emperor in white was not one of them. Then the remaining one. He did know who it was, but he didn't dare to say it. It wasn't because of any malice in the world. He just didn't dare to say it. I really don't know. Xianyuan Wushang said helplessly. But you can rest assured that the other party has no malice. I can guarantee that. It was not malice. The kindness within was practically overflowing from it. I really have no malice. A voice suddenly rang out. A beam of light suddenly lit up in front of Xianyuan Wushang and Qin Weibai. The light was not dazzling, but the moment it appeared, the surrounding space suddenly blurred. In their sight, the figure of the young man with blood mist floating all over his body appeared in front of the 2 again. The black dragon robe was full of sharp light. Qin Weibai narrowed her eyes. But Xianyuan Wushang stood up almost instinctively. He moved the corner of his mouth and finally lowered his head, saying in a hoarse voice, Your Majesty. It was really him. To think that he would actually come. Xianyuan Wushang's eyes were a little dazed. The 3 supreme masters of the human clan. The one in front of him ranked last, but he was the craziest one. He was also the one that people most feared and yearned for. The unfathomable human emperor. The great emperor Xianyuan overlooking the starry sky. And the one in front of him was synonymous with showing off his abilities. His fighting capacity was not the strongest among the 3 supreme masters. But since ancient times, in terms of martial arts alone, his existence was the peak that no one could surpass. He represented the strongest sword light of the human clan. In this respect, even great Emperor Xianyuan and human emperor were not as good as him. A madman who was determined to surpass Her Majesty Huangxi in martial arts, and even had vaguely surpassed the original Huangxi, the god of war's realm. The god of war. The blood mist floated in the air. The young man in the black dragon robe glanced at Xianyuan Wushang, and then nodded slightly to Qin Weibai. Your Highness, please introduce yourself. His voice was calm and gentle. My name is Lin Xianyuan. Wow, so far the number of words I have written this month has exceeded last month. Chapter 1287. My name is Lin Xianyuan. The voice of the god of war was concise and peaceful. But this self-introduction was countless times more effective than any extravagant flattery. Strong wind, heavy rain, thunder, and tsunami. Qin Weibai's entire worldview seemed to be shattered in front of these 3 words. Who was Lin Xianyuan? Zhongzhou State had a population of more than 1 billion. Billions of people in the world. But anyone who went to school and studied history would not be unfamiliar with this name. He was recorded in the history of Zhongzhou State, and the history of all countries in the world. Mentioning this name was like mentioning Genghis Khan, Alexander, and Caesar. Speaking of Napoleon, countless years had passed. As long as civilization existed, these names would always shine in their own times. Lin Xianyuan. Lin Xianyuan, the first generation of the god of war in Zhongzhou State. The founder of Zhuanyuantai in Zhongzhou State. The ancestor of the Lin clan. The only god of war in the history of the Wang family of Beihai. He and the ancestor of the Wang family of Beihai rose decades apart. After the ancestor of Beihai died, he spread his wings and covered the entire Zhongzhou State and Beihai. He did not retreat, but moved forward. In his era, Zhongzhou State completely had the strength and confidence of the world's first power. It was a time when the whole world was silent, and only Zhongzhou State was shining. Different from the ancestor of Beihai, who founded the Wang family of Beihai, and left the southeast group. The first god of war, who guarded Zhongzhou State but never took root in Zhongzhou State, was evaluated even more than the ancestor of Beihai in history. He lived for less than 100 years, but what he did was the real demeanor of the god of war. Qin Weibai couldn't imagine how peerless the god of war had been at his peak. She could only admire his sharpness through the few words in history. But time flew. Hundreds of years had passed. Zhengzhou state had passed 10 generations of gods of war, including Gu Xingyun. When the new god was about to take the throne, someone came to her and told her his name was Lin Xianyuan. It was a feeling of a person in a history book walking into reality. Qin Weibai, who thought she would not be surprised by anything, had a confused look in her eyes. Astonishment, confusion, doubt, and all kinds of emotions intertwined in her eyes, turning into a strong sense of absurdity and ridicule. In the voice that almost shattered the world, Qin Weibai heard her own voice. Your name is Lin Xianyuan? In the floating blood mist, the god of war nodded. Qin Weibai fell silent. She was silent for a long, long time. Everything she had seen about Xianyuan Wuxiang appeared in her mind. His mutterings were inexplicable. He could act mysteriously as he pleased. He did not engage in proper work, eating and waiting for death. But no matter what, this fat man who called him sister-in-law did save Tianlan's life, and made a great contribution to Tianlan's martial arts breakthrough. Finally, Qin Weibai nodded and whispered, So transfer money? Lin Xianyuan. I Emperor Qin send money. How similar was this scene to a joke? However, in Qin Weibai's eyes, they were obviously playing at a higher level. That unforgettable movie. It was a mysterious entrance. Patiently and meticulously laid out the foundation. He even looked for Tua. Qin Weibai thought it was a good job and deserved a reward. Sister-in-law, this is really His Majesty the God of War. The corners of Xianyuan Wuxiang's mouth kept twitching as he tried his best to hold back his laughter. He looked like he was in pain, but he didn't know that he had become a burden in Qin Weibai's heart. Qin Weibai nodded and said briefly, How much do you want? Xianyuan Wuxiang. The god of war suddenly laughed. Looking at Qin Weibai's eyes, he said slowly, It's not that you don't believe us. You just don't believe us. You can't find a reason to believe us, so you try to convince yourself that we are liars. But can you really convince yourself? Qin Weibai frowned. I am the Lin Xianyuan you know, but I can't show you any direct evidence. Countless blood mists burst out from his body. The voice of the god of war was still calm. The Lin clan has my portrait. You should feel that I look familiar. Qin Weibai's heart suddenly shook. The existence of Dongqing is a secret that only you and the other you know. Even Jiang Shangyu doesn't know his name, and you have just seen his life. Time travel and life restart also sound incredible. You don't believe in my existence, which is equivalent to determining the meaning of your own existence. Qin Weibai sneered. Existence is existence. This in itself is meaningful. My being here is meaningful. The god of war nodded in agreement. My being here is also meaningful. Qin Weibai's eyes flashed. The war god's voice continued. You are the initiate, and you have already become a dream puppet. Toying with the consciousness, destroying the mind, and even enslaving the soul is the specialty of your branch. I represent that space-time. If you don't believe me, it is the same as doubting the rationality of your own existence. If a dream realm puppet even doubts the rationality of its own existence, then you're already very close to collapsing. More and more blood mists floated out of the god of war's body, and the faint blood color had almost covered his body. The black dragon robe on his body was shining, and countless patterns were constantly changing. Kill the world. All worlds. This was the divine artifact of the god of war's realm, and also the weapon of the god of war. The different names were because of its two forms. The all worlds in the dragon robe form could be said to be one of the strongest defensive divine artifacts in the starry sky, and the kill the world in the sword form was an invincible divine blade. Its level was not as high as the king guard, but there was only one king guard, and under certain circumstances, the kill the world did not have certain restrictions. The god of war was a person who did not like too many restrictions. Qin Weibai's heart gradually calmed down. After seeing the god of war, their conversation instantly turned into a spiritual storm in her mind, constantly replaying. She glanced at the god of war and said slowly, What are the initiators and dream puppets? The god of war raised his eyebrows, but before he could speak, Xianyuan Wuxiang had already said in a low voice, Your Majesty, be careful with your words. The god of war was silent for a moment, and laughed somewhat self-deprecatingly. I can't give you an answer for now. When there is a chance, I will tell you. Both Qin Weibai and Xianyuan Wushang noticed that the god of war had changed the way he addressed himself. This seemed to be a change in mentality. Xianyuan Wushang breathed a sigh of relief. The miracle city was still calm and tranquil, not attracting the attention of the starry sky. But Xianyuan Wushang was very clear that the starry sky outside the miracle city had long been filled with the flames of war. This was already the beginning of the battle of eradication. He didn't understand what was going on with the god of war in front of him, but he was very sure that the god of war's true body was already on the battlefield. The opponent he faced would naturally not be cannon fodder of the Order camp, but could only be a peak existence similar to the Doomsday. In terms of martial arts authority, the god of war had already reached the true peak. Under normal circumstances, he could indeed say many things that Xianyuan Wushang dared not say, and he also didn't have to be too afraid of the will of the world and the malice of the world. But now the god of war was on the battlefield, and the human race was fighting against the world. For the god of war, the starry sky rules, which had been created by the malice of the world, were already very difficult to deal with him. But the god of war currently had an opponent. If the god of war wanted to ignore it, it was very likely that the moment he said a word, his opponent would suddenly have a fighting strength far beyond his own. And in an instant, the god of war would be seriously injured. If the god of war was sick, it would have a great impact on the entire battlefield. Moreover, taking 10,000 steps back, Xianyuan Wushang himself was the guide of Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai. Under what circumstances, it was Xianyuan Wushang's responsibility and obligation to let them come into contact with the real and cruel starry sky bit by bit. This power was given to him by the space-time corridor, which meant that he represented the will of the space-time corridor. Now was not the time for Qin Weibai to come into contact with these things, so she couldn't. Letting Qin Weibai know that the god of war in front of her was called Lin Xianyuan was actually a violation of the rules. But the god of war had directly descended and said it. What could he do? Xianyuan Wushang felt a little helpless. He took a deep breath and looked at Qin Weibai, who was still in a state of confusion. He frowned and said softly, "Sister-in-law, you don't have to care about whether what His Majesty said is true or not. After all, he doesn't have any malice. And now, some things that you have come into contact with will only bring you danger. And these are all temporarily unnecessary information, so you don't have to look into it. In fact, even if His Majesty exists, you don't have to look into it. He is not the true body, and with his current strength, he is not even a match for Big Brother here." "I don't have the strength." The god of war smiled. His palm seemed to want to touch the table and chair in front of him, but his arm directly passed through the table and chair like a shadow. "I also don't have any ability to interfere with reality. I'm illusory. Other than being able to speak, I basically can't do anything. As for combat power, I don't have any at all." "Where is your true body?" Qin Weibai suddenly asked. If the so-called Lin Xianyuan in front of her couldn't do anything, then the movie just now obviously had something to do with his true body. The god of war took a deep look at her and said softly, "Very, very far, measured in light years." The blood mist in his body burst out at a speed visible to the naked eye. The god of war's voice was very calm. "The world is very big, and you should all see it. Although that's not what you want to see." Qin Weibai's pupils suddenly contracted to the extreme. Very, very far. Measured in light years. This sentence, it contained too many things. Once again, Qin Weibai thought of the only dream she had now. In the dream, there seemed to be an endless starry sky. The stars were like gravel, and it was a vast expanse. Xianyuan Wushang's eyes completely turned cold. "Your Majesty, the god of war, you've gone too far. Let him speak." Qin Weibai said. "I still insist on my point of view." Xianyuan Wushang's words showed an extremely intense emotion. Right in front of Qin Weibai, he opened his palm. A glowing cube appeared in his hand. The cube slowly unfolded, revealing extremely small components one after another. One of the small gears, which was almost invisible, turned into a thick book. Xianyuan Wushang opened the book expressionlessly and directly turned to the last page. On the last page, the dialogue between the god of war and Qin Weibai had appeared line by line on the page. Xianyuan Wuxiang bit his finger and used his blood as ink. He quickly scratched out line after line of words on the page with his blood-stained finger. Almost instinctively, Qin Weibai sensed that something was wrong. She frowned and said, "Your." Xianyuan Wuxiang's finger had crossed out the last line of the dialogue. Time flew. The white clouds were leisurely, and the sun was just right. Xianyuan Wuxiang's body trembled slightly. There was no injury on the surface, but the near-fatal injury began to gather and stack inside his body like a storm. His face instantly turned pale, and his breath completely fell to the bottom. Qin Weibai also had a real brand. He only crossed out a few lines on the page and slightly touched the real brand, but his body had accumulated unimaginably terrible injuries. He was the guide of Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai. He could use his authority to write in his book, but if he wanted to change it by force, he would have to pay a price. There was a moment of trance in Qin Weibai's eyes. This trance lasted less than half a second, and she was completely awake. Xianyuan Wuxiang quickly looked down at the page. On the page was the dialogue between him and Qin Weibai. "I just want to know who invited me to watch that movie. Well, I didn't see him either," Xianyuan Wuxiang said with a wry smile. "How would I know if I didn't see him?" He picked up the Coke and took a sip. That man was wearing a black dragon robe. Puff. Cough, 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 cough. Xianyuan Wuxiang spat out the Coke and coughed violently. "Are you sure?" He looked at Qin Weibai and asked. "It should be the dragon robe. That dress is more fancy than Wu Qing's, and the pattern keeps changing," Qin Weibai said in a low voice. "World Punisher." "No, it's all worlds," Xianyuan Wuxiang said softly. "What?" Qin Weibai asked. "Nothing." Everything stopped there. Everything below was covered by the blood-like ink. Xianyuan Wuxiang narrowed his eyes slightly, and the book in his hand disappeared completely. Qin Weibai's voice sounded like the covered content of the book. "Who is it? Tell me." Everything went back to before the god of war appeared. But the god of war was still there. This time, Xianyuan Wuxiang didn't hesitate. He coughed and responded quickly. He pointed to the god of war beside him and said with a smile, "Sister-in-law, are you talking about this one?" Qin Weibai suddenly looked back. The god of war stood aside and nodded to her. He seemed to want to say something, but Xianyuan Wuxiang didn't give him the chance to speak. He said with a smile, "Sister-in-law, let me introduce you. This is my third uncle, Qin Weibai, the god of war." Xianyuan Wuxiang looked at the god of war with a smile and called him third uncle. Qin Weibai frowned. She didn't know why, but she felt something was wrong with her current mood, but she couldn't tell what was wrong. She hesitated a little and said slowly, "Your third uncle looks younger than you." "Sister-in-law, it hurts my feelings. Fat people also have human rights." Xianyuan Wuxiang looked aggrieved and helpless. "Third uncle." The god of war repeated and looked at Xianyuan Wuxiang with a faint smile. Xianyuan Wuxiang's eyes were calm, as if it was a matter of course. The three supreme masters of the human clan, at least so far, were ranked like this. The great emperor and the god of war sounded majestic, but to put it bluntly, wasn't it Xianyuan the first, Wang the second, and Lin the third? She called the god of war third uncle, which made sense in terms of seniority. Qin Weibai shook her head subconsciously. She felt like she had overlooked something. It was like an occasional flash of inspiration, but before she could grasp it, the flickering thoughts had disappeared without a trace. She took a deep look at the third uncle in a black dragon robe, and for the first time, she used honorifics. "Hello." The god of war was stunned and nodded. "Hello." The atmosphere seemed to be a little too polite. Xianyuan Wuxiang scratched his head. Qin Weibai wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Finally she began to speak. She and Li Tianlan were Xianyuan Wuxiang's brother and sister-in-law. So, she naturally had to call Xianyuan Wuxiang's third uncle. But before she opened her mouth, the god of war took the initiative to say, "Just call me third brother. My surname is Lin." "Well, third brother Lin." He seemed to find this title very interesting and he laughed. Qin Weibai gave him a baffled look and said slowly, "The movie just now was very exciting. As long as you're satisfied." I'm also very satisfied. The god of war nodded. Is it true? Qin Weibai suddenly asked. The god of war glanced at her and nodded. It happened after you left and came here. Dongqing's state was very bad. It could have been maintained, but after destroying Beihai, his state became worse and worse. In fact, he came here by accident and wanted to find you, but he didn't have time. It was because of that time and space intersection that the dragon vein in Tianlan and Dongqing's body could be complete. Of course, the man named Xian Xuanzi also made a lot of efforts. After Beihai was gone, you saw what Dongqing was like. So, I invited you to watch that movie, and at the same time, let Dongqing see you. His current state is barely stable, and with his current strength he is qualified to touch some of the truth, so in the future he will get better and better. The truth? Qin Weibai whispered to herself and asked, what is it? Sister-in-law, I can't tell you now. It's very dangerous for you and him. Xianyuan Wushang interrupted. The god of war glanced at him and said calmly, what I can tell you now is that you and Tianlan need to continue to break through. Some of the names here are interesting. Let's call it the transcendent realm in the spiritual field. But this realm is not complete, or in other words, there is no real limit. Spiritual power is also terrible, not inferior to martial arts at all. When your spiritual power catches up with that Saint Emperor, and you can directly break out like Li Kuangtu, this fat man will tell you some truth. Spiritual power is a path, but whether it is Saint Emperor or Li Kuangtu, they only chose half of it. The right path is to combine the two. This fat man, me, and many people are waiting for you to go on the right path. Qin Weibai was in a daze, and no one knew if she heard the god of war's words. After a while she asked, can Tianlan and I still see Dongqing? When you know the truth, you will know whether you can see him or not. The god of war said softly, you have been there, and he has been here. There is a chance. Qin Weibai nodded and didn't say anything. What else do you want to ask? The god of war looked at her calmly. Qin Weibai was at a loss. She thought she had a lot of questions. But maybe it was because her spiritual power had just broken through. Or something else. Her thoughts were in a mess. In silence, she shook her head and said simply, I haven't thought about it yet. Don't worry. The god of war said quietly. I will stay here for a while. You can find me at any time. Xianyuan Wushang raised his eyebrows and looked at the god of war nervously. Qin Weibai understood that he meant to send her away. She still felt something was wrong, but she didn't delay. She nodded and left. The clinic was quiet again. The god of war stood silently, watching Qin Weibai's back pass through the flowers and woods and step on the arch bridge. Suddenly he said, she seems to be in a daze. She knows something is wrong, but she doesn't know what is wrong at the moment. Are you sure it's good for her to be like this? Xianyuan Wushang stood a little behind the god of war. He thought for a while and said calmly, I don't know, but I'm sure it's not good to tell her part of the truth like your majesty did. I can help her withstand the suppression of the world's will, and keep her safe. The god of war said calmly. That's not something you should care about, your majesty. A sharp look flashed in Xianyuan Wushang's eyes. The return of these two is the most important thing in the space-time corridor right now. It's even more important than the current war. Your majesty, I have my own guiding plan and rhythm. Have you not considered my father's and the others' attitudes when you interfere so rashly? It's an accident. The god of war gave an explanation that wasn't really an explanation. What do you mean? Xianyuan Wushang was confused. Help me arrange for me to get to know Li Tianlan. The god of war's tone was simple, as if he was giving an order. Impossible. Xianyuan Wushang's response was resolute. He had been restraining his attitude, but now he couldn't bear it anymore. What on earth does your majesty want to do? Could it be that before his majesty returned, he also hoped that someone like you would come and disturb the process of his return? If there's an accident, there will come a day. Aren't you afraid of being punished? She won't remember. The god of war suddenly said. Xianyuan Wushang was stunned. Even if I just told her part of the truth, she won't remember. Once she leaves this door, she will forget most of the things, and then remember them little by little. You know Qin Weibai's character better than I do. She's absolutely calm and rational. She's very receptive and decisive. There are some things she can't remember or understand. She will hypnotize herself to let go. That's why I'm relieved to tell her some things. You changed her memory, and I respect your choice. But in fact, it's not necessary. Even if you don't do it, she will forget a lot, and then the next day she will return to the state before today. Some of the things I tell her will only leave a very vague hint in her heart, which can help her correct her path. You tell her I mean no harm, but why don't you believe it yourself? Xianyuan Wushang was completely silent. He didn't believe that the god of war wanted to interrupt their return. But the god of war's appearance here really made him a little uneasy. There was a flash of hesitation in his eyes, and he asked, Your Majesty, what on earth do you want to do here? To solve Li Dongqing's psychological problem, the god of war answered without hesitation. And now it seems that the effect is very good. This kind of thing can be done by Xianyuan Luanhui, and he does it very well. Why did Your Majesty come in person? I felt the real imprint of Her Highness Qin Weibai. The god of war's eyes were sharp. From this point of view, you can say that Her Highness asked me to come here. Of course, coming here is also my original purpose. I don't understand. Xianyuan Wushang's voice was cold. What does my current state look like in your eyes? There was a very strange color in the god of war's eyes. Xianyuan Wushang turned his head and looked at the god of war in front of him seriously. The god of war's loose black dragon robe was still slightly shaking in the windless room, and the blood mist all over his body was like small fireworks. Of course, Xianyuan Wushang knew why. Because the god of war's real body was on the battlefield at this time. Only the end of the world could cause such terrible and dense injuries to him, a person at the peak of martial arts. In a real battlefield, this bloody mist might be the result of endless dark energy blasts, or gamma rays that exceeded the limits of the limit blasting his body. But why could he see it? Xianyuan Wushang frowned. The battle god in front of him should only be a projection of the sword qi of the battle god. The sword qi of the battle god had just swept past Miracle City not long ago, so it was completely understandable that it could form such a projection. However, if it was a projection, he shouldn't be able to see the injuries related to his real body. The current state of the battle god was indeed a bit strange. You are, Xianyuan Wushang asked softly. This is me. The god of war said. You can think of it as my real body, but this is an illusory real body. Xianyuan Wushang was dumbfounded. What was an illusory real body? Martial arts also had such fancy means now? This is a new thing I've been studying. The god of war said. I didn't mean to do this, but I didn't expect to come up with these messy things. A new thing. Xianyuan Wushang weighed the weight of this word, and his heart was already surging with stormy waves. He raised his head and stared at the god of war. You've created a new authority? What was authority? Authority was not just power. Instead, it was something that was built on fundamental cognition. Only when a living being was conscious could it have the most fundamental cognition. And all the authority was the authority of the world. Eating, breathing, walking, and even the length of life were all part of the authority. It could be knowledge, force, or something else. Survival was the most basic thing. In a person's life, every word, every action, and every look could be said to be a part of the authority. And this was the most basic part. The instinct of breathing and moving was the most basic authority given to life by the world. The authority that could go from the basic to the peak was the authority that everyone in the neutral camp was struggling to survive. For example, martial arts. There were all kinds of authority, but there were only a few that could go to the peak smoothly. In the current neutral camp, there were only 3 kinds of authority that could go to the peak. In the simplest words, they were martial arts, fraud, and calligrapher. The creator of all 3 kinds of authority was Huang Shi. That was Li Tianlan now. And the order camp had 3.5 authorities. As for the dark shadow, they only had 1 kind of authority. But under the rules of chaos, they could ignore the camp and use all the abilities of any camp and any authority. And now, the god of war had created a 4th kind of authority. For the whole starry sky, this was really a big deal. At least, it meant that there was one more possibility for the neutral camp to go to the peak. I just have a general idea. The god of war shook his head. It may not succeed. At present, This authority is only to improve some of my own shortcomings and strengthen my own strengths. Maybe the upper limit of this authority is only level 5 or level 6. Your father has tried this much more than I have. The ultimate authority of this authority is, Xianyuan Wushang asked carefully, his eyes full of awe. Killing. Destruction. The god of war's voice was very calm. Xianyuan Wushang's heart skipped a beat. This kind of authority was already close to the existing two kinds of authority. What I want is the purest killing and destruction. All kinds of methods are okay, as long as I can destroy everything in the shortest time in the most straightforward way. But I accidentally created this thing. A touch of embarrassment flashed in the god of war's eyes. He seemed to recall the time when he was trapped in the screen. So, what is this thing? Xianyuan Wushang asked carefully. The god of war was silent for a while and said slowly, "This is a memory. This so-called authority with killing and destruction as the main authority. The only function at present is to make myself disappear completely." Xianyuan Wushang was speechless. Be more specific? The god of war glanced at him. Be more specific. When you can remember me, I exist. When you can't remember me, I don't exist. His sword energy swept over the sky of Miracle City not long ago. So in the biological laboratory, Qin Weibai and Li Guangtu mentioned the god of war when talking about Li Huawu. So the god of war formed a simple projection with their memories. He invited them to watch a movie. When the movie ended, the projection of the god of war was trapped between two spaces. So Qin Weibai saw his figure on the monitor screen. As long as Qin Weibai continued to think, the god of war would soon appear on the screen. But Qin Weibai, she decided not to think. She didn't want to think. So the projection of the god of war, trapped between two spaces, struggled for a long time before rushing out. But even if he rushed out, he could only be trapped in the biological laboratory. He could only use his real brand to stimulate Qin Weibai's real brand. So Qin Weibai came here and had a conversation with Xianyuan Wushang. Then Qin Weibai and Xianyuan Wushang's memory synchronized. In essence, the god of war, who was just a projection of a memory, could directly appear here. This ability. Xianyuan Wushang looked at the god of war silently. It's a bit nonsense. If this ability matures, there should be many more ways to use it. It will be very terrible. The god of war whispered. But it's the wrong way. Xianyuan Wushang sighed. If the new authority was purely to kill and destroy, then the ability in front of him obviously had nothing to do with the authority. This kind of ability was more like a concealment ability. It was very strange, very fancy. So introduce me to Li Tianlan. The god of war said. You want to? Xianyuan Wushang narrowed his eyes. Talk about swordsmanship. The god of war smiled. By the way, we can discuss the new authority. He created a neutral camp. Maybe I can get some inspiration from him. Chapter 1288. She left the clinic. When she calmed down completely, it was already evening. The blood-red setting sun burned the layers of clouds, rendering the entire sky magnificent. Qin Weibai sat alone in the pavilion, looking at the sky in the distance. She watched the light between heaven and earth turn from daytime to dim yellow, to fiery red, to dark, and to dim little by little. The setting sun completely sank. There was only a dim yellow afterglow in the distant sky. The bright moon had risen above her head. In the hazy night, the wind was cold, and the place was quiet and peaceful. Qin Weibai stood up and gently took a breath. In the hazy darkness of the night, a shadow also stood up on the grass outside the pavilion. The golden retriever, which had lived here since Emperor Dong's palace was built, looked at Qin Weibai and trotted over. The bell on its neck made a crisp sound as it moved. Qin Weibai looked down at it quietly. It trotted to Qin Weibai, squatted down and quieted down again. Hungry? Qin Weibai smiled and touched its head. The golden retriever didn't move. It just wagged its tail comfortably, as if it wasn't hungry. It had completely grown up. In terms of a dog's lifespan, it wasn't young, but it didn't look old at all. Its fur was soft and beautiful, and it was very energetic. The golden retriever was undoubtedly very smart. Although Qin Weibai and Li Tianlan didn't spend much time playing with it, every time it saw them in Emperor Dong's palace, It would take the initiative to stick to them. If it wasn't driven away, it would stay near them and play. Qin Weibai sat in the pavilion for half the afternoon. The golden retriever also stayed on the lawn outside the pavilion for half the afternoon. It occasionally rolled around and chased butterflies, but it never left the pavilion. Qin Weibai thought for a moment and squatted down in front of the golden retriever. The golden retriever tilted its head, and its bright eyes were also looking at her. Its body was very clean, with traces of a very gentle perfume smell. The golden retriever was a very intelligent dog. If it was domesticated, it would be as smart as a 6 or 7-year-old child. So it could eat by itself and find its own bathroom. After Xiao Mahai became the director of Emperor Dong's palace, he directly took the golden retriever to his villa. In the words of Director Xiao, they were all His Majesty's dogs, so they should live together. Therefore, the director of Emperor Dong's palace spent a lot of time raising pets after work. Even if he was so busy that he didn't have time to eat, he would not forget to send food to the golden retriever. The golden retriever had reached the pinnacle of his dog life during this period of time. Even putting on perfume, according to the standard of food and accommodation of the core members of Emperor Dong's palace. Qin Weibai's fingers gently stroked the fine fur on the dog's head. She looked into its eyes and whispered, "Do you miss your real master?" The golden retriever whined, and its eyes were somewhat innocent. Qin Weibai squatted in front of it, lost in thought. Many people knew the origin of this golden retriever. Li Tianlan liked dogs, but he never had the temperament to raise pets by himself, and he didn't have the time. This golden retriever was given to him by Wang Yuetong, the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai, when Li Tianlan first entered the secular world. At that time, the golden retriever was very small, only a few months old. Now it had already lived half of its life. If only she was here. Qin Weibai murmured to herself, and her eyes were a little aggrieved. She thought of this morning. She thought of the scene when Li Tianlan hugged her tightly. He said that he had been thinking about nonsense these days, and he felt that he was not himself. He said that he was unique. At that time, Qin Weibai had never been satisfied but also lost. That was the feeling of being loved by the most powerful man in the world, being spoiled by him, and being loved by him. But Qin Weibai was very clear that that feeling was for herself, but also not for herself. It was a very contradictory thought. But Qin Weibai was very clear that the so-called herself was two individuals. Although they were actually one, in the eyes of others, after all, they were two individuals. She was Qin Weibai. She was the master of Samsara Palace. She had always insisted that she and herself were really the same person. Military counselor and Flaming Fire did not agree with this. But Saint and Horsewoman tacitly agreed with this. Qin Weibai had always felt that it didn't matter, because she thought that they were really the same person. Memory, thinking, language, perception, movement, body. Everything was completely synchronized. Who could say that they were not the same person? No matter who it was, Qin Weibai could not care less. But only Li Tianlan was different. Everything should not have gone wrong. The master of Samsara Palace would die in Snow Country. She would become the only Qin Weibai, replacing herself and accompanying Li Tianlan. She was her, unique, and Li Tianlan would never find out the truth. No, there was no truth. She was Qin Weibai. This was the truth. She did not have to pretend to be another person at all, because she was herself. This was also her original plan. But the master of Samsara Palace did not die, but was brought to the Lin clan, which made Qin Weibai not fully get into the state at the beginning. Then some details began to be more and more loopholes. Li Tianlan now did not expect that there would be two Qin Weibai. So for some details, he just thought that he was imagining things. After a few days of madness, he now doted on her even more. But once there was doubt, it was only a matter of time before it was exposed. Especially when Jiang Shangyu was not dead yet. If both Jiang Shangyu appeared in front of Li Tianlan, it was enough to make him realize something. Qin Weibai did not dare to imagine what Li Tianlan would do after knowing the so-called truth, nor did she know what he would become. But his performance had already explained a lot of things. It was just as he had said. He felt that she was not herself. This was a kind of unintentional denial, which also made Qin Weibai's inner uneasiness reach the peak. She did not know how long she could keep pretending, although she felt that she was not pretending at all. Baby, what do you think we should do? Qin Weibai touched the head of the golden retriever and asked in a low voice. The golden retriever blinked its eyes and stuck out its tongue to lick Qin Weibai's palm. If he finds out the truth, he will not be able to bear it. If your real master is here, maybe he can continue to accompany her in my place. Qin Weibai murmured. The golden retriever lay down and rolled over, showing its belly to Qin Weibai. In fact, no one is a substitute. Your original master is not, and neither am I. Qin Weibai reached out and scratched the belly of the golden retriever and laughed. He fell in love with me at the beginning, so he can fall in love with me now, right? She stood up and stamped her feet gently. The golden retriever got up and circled around Qin Weibai, as if it wanted to play. I'm going to accompany him. I'll come to play with you another day. Qin Weibai patted the dog's head, turned around, walked out of the pavilion, and went to the castle. The golden retriever sat in the pavilion until Qin Weibai's figure disappeared. Then it wagged its tail and turned to run to Xiao Mahai's villa. After washing her hands and changing her clothes, Qin Weibai returned to Li Tianlan's office. A large number of materials were still piled up on the expensive desk in the office, but some of them were obviously sorted out. It seemed that Li Tianlan had finished reading and memorized them. When Qin Weibai pushed the door open and walked in, Li Tianlan was not behind the desk, but sitting in front of the sofa by the French window, reaching out to pinch between his eyebrows. Qin Weibai trotted to his back, held his head with her slightly cold fingertips, and let him lean on the sofa. She smiled softly and said, "Tired?" "I'm fine." Li Tianlan opened his eyes, moved his body, and tried to push his head up. Qin Weibai obediently bent down slightly, letting his head touch her chest. "Are you hungry? Should I order some food? Or should I make some dishes for you?" Qin Weibai looked down at Li Tianlan. Her cooking skills could be said to have been taught by Yu Donglai, because she was extremely confident. Li Tianlan looked up at her. He rarely looked at Qin Weibai from this angle. To be exact, it was the first time. The face in his sight was still beautiful, exquisite, and dreamy. Separated by the proud peaks, it was hazy, but it had a special charm. "Forget it, eat whatever you like. I'm mainly eating you tonight." Li Tianlan reached out and pinched her face. "You're not serious." Qin Weibai glared at him. "Then let's talk about something serious." Li Tianlan moved his body. "I just talked to Zhou Yu on the phone." Qin Weibai was stunned, and a touch of deep thought flashed in her eyes. "Zhou Yu of Huating?" Li Tianlan said yes. Qin Weibai subconsciously slowed down the strength of massaging Li Tianlan and pondered. In today's Zhongzhou state politics, when it came to the hot young people, the first was naturally the current governor of Nanyue, Zhou Yuanshan, who was almost certain to become the speaker of Nanyue after the election. At the age of 38, almost everyone thought that he would be the new leader of the new group in 15 to 20 years. The second was the governor of Jianghuai, Wang Jingxin. He was the core figure of the Wang family of Beihai and the Southeast Group. Although Zhou Yuanshan and the local forces of Jiangxia worked together to push him out of Jiangxia during the internal reshuffle of Beihai, Wang Jingxin did not show any signs of decline after he went to Jianghuai. In the past 2 years in Jianghuai, he was quite diligent. He was about the same age as Zhou Yuanshan. In this election, Zhou Yuanshan would enter the parliament one step ahead of him, but no one dared to say that Wang Jingxin would not have a chance in the future. In this position, there were too many variables between advance and retreat. A little carelessness could cause one to waste a few years in the same place. It was not uncommon for the latecomer to catch up. And after Wang Jingxin, it was the current deputy speaker of the Southwest Group, Zhou Qi. In the past year, Zhou Qi's status had soared like a rocket. Seriously speaking, Zhou Qi began to become more and more conspicuous when Chen Fangqing began to be unable to bear the pressure. After Chen Fangqing's death, Zhou Qi suddenly became the core of the core. Obviously, the Prince Group intended to unite all the forces that could be united. By supporting Zhou Qi, they could get the full support of the former forces of Zhou Tong, and deal with the pressure from the new group and the Southeast Group more easily. Zhou Qi was now the deputy speaker of the Southwest Group. There were already rumors that after the election, He might skip the transition of the mayor and directly become the speaker. This year, Zhou Qi was in his early 40s. If he could reach the top in Southwest City, he would undoubtedly enter the parliament. This was also what the Prince Group was currently working hard to promote. After Zhou Qi was Zhou Yu. Although they had the same surname, they were not relatives. Zhou Yu was the nephew of Zhou Yunhai, the current leader of the North Group, and the current mayor of Huating. He was also in his early 40s. He was originally only the deputy mayor of Northern City. The reason why he could control the Huating municipal government was that the Prince Group and the Academy worked together to suppress the Southeast Group and the Giant Group more than 2 years ago. The North Group repeatedly jumped around and gained a lot of benefits, a considerable part of which fell on Zhou Yu. When Yu Chuanguang left Huating and was transferred to Wuyue, Zhou Qi took one step from Northern City to Huating and held the position of mayor. According to the intelligence of the new group and the Southeast Group, Zhou Qi's current life in Huating was not good, but it was not bad either. He had established his authority and firmly grasped a series of matters in the municipal government, especially the financial power. This was also his most powerful weapon against the speaker of the Prince Group. As long as he could hold the financial power, it would be difficult for the speaker to intervene in the big matters of the municipal government. If the speaker wanted to intervene, he could only make a deal with him with the power of speech. Originally, it was not a bad situation to maintain this situation. After the election, the speaker of Huating would retire. Even if he could not take advantage of the situation to take the position, it was enough to further expand his influence by staying in the position of mayor for the future. But now Huating was turbulent, and Zhou Yu was in it. His position suddenly became extremely critical. In the face of the increasingly strange situation, it was completely understandable that he had some ideas. Zhou Yu took the initiative to find you? Qin Weibai's voice was very gentle. Li Tianlan nodded and said, yes. He can't get the position of speaker. Qin Weibai's voice was crisp and decisive. What was Huating's status in Zhongzhou State? It was the most prosperous international metropolis in the whole of Zhongzhou State, and one of the main windows of Zhongzhou State to the outside world. Those who could sit in the position of speaker were all big shots at the top level of governor, and then became one of the most influential members of parliament in Zhongzhou State. Zhou Yu's qualifications were far from enough. In fact, based on his qualifications, it was already the limit for him to sit in the position of mayor. Under normal circumstances, it was unlikely for him to sit in this position. He's still very clear-headed. Li Tianlan smiled. He doesn't plan to fight for the position of speaker, but he hopes to get my support to fight for a few heavyweight positions in Huating for him. The situation in Huating is quite serious this time, and it is estimated that there will be a complete reshuffle before the election. Is he going to be the uncrowned king in Huating? Qin Weibai smiled. Fighting for a few heavyweight positions, such as the Ministry of Personnel, the Supervisory Department, the police. If these departments were controlled by Zhou Yu, he would promote a standing director from the municipal government. Together with the current speaker of Wudong New Area and the military representative who naturally stood with the Dongqing clan, Zhou Yu would occupy 7 positions in the director's seat in Huating. What did this mean? No matter whether there were 11 or 13 people in the Huating Council after the reshuffle, 7 votes was a majority. With these, even if Zhou Yu was not the speaker, many decisions in Huating could not be carried out without his approval. As an absolutely powerful second-in-command, as long as he knew his limits and could make the group and the parliament believe that he could control Huating, he would be the next speaker of Huating. The uncrowned king is exaggerating, Li Tianlan said softly, but he thinks he can be a powerful helmsman of the municipal government. It's not appropriate, Qin Weibai said softly. Li Tianlan was silent for a moment and nodded. Indeed so. He reached out and patted the document beside him. I refuse. Qin Weibai bent down to take the document and glanced at it. It should be the information that Li Tianlan found temporarily. On it were the resumes and information of the current 13 directors of Huating, including various actual conditions, ages, origins, and important speeches on various occasions. Now there were 12 directors in Huating, and one of them was already drinking tea in the supervisory department. His information was not important. Qin Weibai quickly flipped through it and said softly, Huiting, a place of trouble. Zhou Yu is a man with a heart. He wants to stay in Huiting and fight for a channel of promotion for Jiangxia in the future. Li Tianlan laughed. Zhou Yu was Zhou Yunhai's nephew, but now he was the core of the new group and his position was extremely firm. The relationship between the new group and the North group had always been very subtle. The two sides were very close, and in fact they had a certain degree of in-depth cooperation, or even integration. However, Zhou Yunhai obviously did not want to integrate the entire North City into the new group, so he would support Li Tianlan on some matters. But his support was always limited. Strictly speaking, the two sides were not so much integrating, but it was more like Zhou Yunhai began to consciously eliminate those who were in the North group, but had their hearts in the new group after discovering the strong influence of the Flourishing Age Fund. And Zhou Yu was a representative of such people. This was not a betrayal or anything else, but a very normal choice. The so-called group was just a force that everyone had to work together to fight against external forces when they had the same position. It was not impossible to change. Zhou Yu made a change, and the change was extremely firm, so he talked a lot with Li Tianlan on the phone, and the discussion was very thorough. However, Qin Weibai still shook her head. Tianlan, it's not worth the loss to support Zhou Yu now. I think if we can let Zhou Yu leave Huiting, it will be the best choice. In recent years, the situation in Huiting had been relatively complicated. All the major groups had their hands in it, forming a delicate balance. Now in Huiting, Zhou Yu the mayor represented the power of the new group, and he was the only one. However, because Dongqing Qiuqi used to be the speaker of Wudong New Area, the current speaker of Wudong New Area, and the representative of Huiting's army headquarters were all members of the giant group. They were also Zhou Yu's greatest confidants and most loyal allies in Huiting. Zhong Yue, the speaker of Huiting, the ministers of the Ministry of Personnel and the Propaganda Department, plus the one who was now drinking tea in the Ministry of Supervision, were the Prince Group's base in Huiting. The power of the Ministry of Supervision used to belong to the Southeast Group. With Wang Xiaoyao's betrayal, the Ministry of Supervision in Huiting became Wang Xiaoyao's direct subordinates. They were not in the camp of the Southeast Group, but close to the Prince Group, but not the force of the Prince Group. The Huiting Ministry of Supervision changed its commander a few days ago. The former Minister of Supervision was transferred to Wuyue, and Yu Chuanguang was also away for a while, so Wang Xiaoyao's force had officially left Huiting. They still had some influence in Huiting, but without a leader, such influence was destined to be useless. The new Minister of Supervision in Huiting and the current Deputy Speaker of Huiting were the force of the Southeast Group. In addition, a Deputy Mayor of the municipal government was the force of the North Group, slightly close to Zhou Yu, but not one of them. The other board members were from the academic faction. The Special Warfare Group still controlled the Special Operations Bureau. This was the current power distribution in Huiting, and it was foreseeable that in the following period, this power distribution would definitely become unrecognizable. Huiting had become the focus of the game between the Prince Group and the Southeast Group. The Prince Group had a strong influence, but the storm stirred up by Wang Xiaoyao was quite disadvantageous to Zhong Yue. This was also the weapon of the Southeast Group at this time. The Prince Group intended to win over Wang Qinglei, and then get the whole Wuyue, but it did not intend to give up Huiting. Seeing that it had lost Wuyue, the Southeast Group naturally wanted to use Huiting to cut losses. The mentality of the two groups became the key to Wang Xiaoyao's survival in the crack, and the other directors who were still in Huiting were just fish in the moat. With Zhou Yu's current position in Huiting, he did see the opportunity, and even had a complete plan to take advantage of this opportunity. Qin Weibai did not deny that this could fight for the interests of the new group. But once he took action in Huiting, he would directly confront and offend the Prince Group and the Southeast Group. This was not a confrontation of martial arts. In the game rules of the high level, there was no daring, only whether it was worth it or not. They could tolerate the existence of Zhou Yu, but they absolutely could not tolerate Li Tianlan placing a few more heavyweight directors in Huiting. Moreover, Zhou Yu was not necessarily selfless. If Li Tianlan agreed to support his plan this time, it would definitely make the whole new group work to support him, which would also help him improve his position in the new group. Qin Weibai could understand this mentality, but the current Huading was really not so tempting for the new group. On the contrary, it was the best choice to let Zhou Yu quit Huading and give up the position of the helmsman of the municipal government. Quit, Li Tianlan whispered to himself. How to arrange it? Zhou Yu was the mayor of Huading. This position was extremely important in the governor's sequence, and it was also one of the positions closest to the councillors. From this point of view, this position was even more important than that of the speaker of some remote provinces. If Zhou Yu was asked to leave this position without making good arrangements, it would inevitably make people disappointed. Qin Weibai smiled and said softly, "At this time, as long as Zhou Yu is willing to quit, we don't need to worry about how to arrange it. The Prince Group and the Southeast Group will rush to arrange it for him. My suggestion is to let him enter Yuzhou, either the Development Committee or the Finance Department. The possibility of compromise between the Prince Group and the Southeast Group is very high. As long as Zhou Yu goes there, he can better cooperate with Wuxiang and Speaker Bai. Zhou Yu himself will also be willing. Although such a transfer can't be called a promotion, it is in line with the strategic direction of the group. In the group, his position can also be regarded as rising. To say the least, even if he can't go to Zhongzhou State, it's not bad to go to Beijiang." Li Tianlan shook his head. Beijiang. Zhou Yu doesn't have this qualification. Beijiang was located in the border, far less prosperous than Huading, but it was the largest province in Zhongzhou State, and the situation in some aspects was more sensitive. Zhou Yu was not qualified to compete for the speaker of Huading, nor was he qualified to control Beijiang. Jiang Shangyu would go to the front after the election, and the country of Beijiang must be retreated. This was also the bargaining chip that Li Huaqing gave to Li Tianlan. But who would go to Beijiang had always been a great headache for the new group. Zhou Yuanshan wanted to stay in Nanyue. The new group currently elected to replace Jiang Shan was the current deputy speaker of Jiangxia, Jiankong. There was no doubt about Jiankong's ability, but his biggest problem was the same as Zhou Yu's seniority. A senior deputy governor suddenly stepped into the position of a member of parliament, which was like a meteoric rise. As expected, the resistance was great. Even with the support of the academics, the possibility of success was not too high. At present, there was only one person in the new group who was qualified to control Beijiang, and that was Bai Qingqian. Li Huaqing also meant the same. Bai Qingqian went to Beijiang. Jiankong was transferred to Yuzhou as the helmsman of a certain department in the cabinet. He was Wu Jingmin's old subordinate, and could better cooperate with Wu Jingmin. However, as soon as Bai Qingqian left, the new group would lose a deputy prime minister, which was greatly disadvantageous to their plan to win the right to speak in the cabinet. At present, this issue had not been discussed because of too much resistance from all sides. But as the election was getting closer and closer, this had become a problem that the new group could not avoid. Then let's not touch the speaker for the time being. Qin Weibai suddenly said. Li Tianlan was stunned. Zhou Yu and Jiankong both went there. Zhou Yu is the governor and Jiankong continues to be the deputy speaker. Jiang Shan doesn't have to step down for the time being. We can't arrange some heavyweight directors in Huading, but in Beijiang, it's not a big problem. Even if we don't have anyone sit in the position of speaker in Beijiang for the time being, the actual right to speak in Beijiang will be in our hands. Qin Weibai smiled. In this case, there's a lot of room for manipulation. Li Tianlan said softly, I'll discuss it with Minister Wuxiang and the others another day. Qin Weibai said softly. Li Tianlan reached out and held Qin Weibai's palm, letting the slightly cold palm cover his eyes. He whispered, Where did you go? I was sitting here just now, and then I saw you sitting alone in the gazebo for a long time. I wandered around and got tired. I happened to see Bao Bao chasing butterflies there, so I took a rest for a while. Qin Weibai said softly. By the way, I also went to Fatty's clinic in the afternoon. Fatty's third uncle came. His name is Third Lin. He's very mysterious, but I don't think he's a simple man. Qin Weibai said in a low voice. Third Lin. Li Tianlan was a little stunned. What a strange name. And why was the surname of Fatty's third uncle Lin? I should meet him. Li Tianlan said softly. Xianyuan Wushang's background was definitely not simple. Anyone who knew a little about him knew this. His family, especially his elders, were naturally more important to Li Tianlan. Then call them now? How about treating them to dinner? Qin Weibai said. I'll make a few dishes myself. It'll be more formal. Li Tianlan thought for a moment, nodded, took out his mobile phone, and directly dialed Xianyuan Wushang's number. The phone kept ringing. Xianyuan Wushang didn't pick it up until it was about to automatically hang up. Just from his tone, it could be seen that the fatty was very excited. Big brother? Li Tianlan hummed. Before he could speak, Xianyuan Wushang had already started shouting. Go, go, go. They can't hold on anymore. Group 2, go and fight the boss. The others, follow me and guard the bodies. That priest, kill him for me. Li Tianlan was speechless. Qin Weibai subconsciously raised her hand and rubbed her forehead. Xianyuan Wushang, the internet addict and fat homebody, was real. Have you eaten? Li Tianlan took a deep breath and asked. I drank 2 liters of Coke. I'm not hungry for now. I'll order something to eat later. Big brother, what's the matter? Are you not feeling well? What's wrong with you? Xianyuan Wushang spoke very quickly. It was clear that he wanted to end the call as soon as possible. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth twitched. He resisted the urge to rush over and slap the fatty. He said slowly, You have a third uncle in Emperor Dong's palace? Xianyuan Wushang was silent for a moment and laughed. What a coincidence. He just left an hour ago. My third uncle was going to ask me to introduce you to each other, but I told him that big brother is a little busy these days. He said he understood and left. He hasn't been back to Zhongzhou State for many years, and wants to travel around. Besides, he has a son in Nanlu State who also plans to visit his relatives. I guess when he comes back, big brother, you're almost done with your work. I'll introduce him to you then. Li Tianlan shook his head. You don't have to be polite. You directly made the decision for me. We're family. There's no need to play these tricks. Besides, big brother, you're really busy these days. My third uncle wants to talk to you about something. It's not urgent, but he needs you to concentrate. It's meaningless if you can't calm down. So I asked him to come after the election. You should have some time then. Xianyuan Wushang said. Li Tianlan thought for a moment and said, Let's talk about it then. Come over for some food? Your sister-in-law will cook for you. I'm not going. Xianyuan Wushang answered without hesitation. We're fighting a boss on the battlefield. Big brother, do you want to play games? I'll take you to Fly, Panga Heaven and Earth. It's so fun. The company that developed this game is a subsidiary of the Flourishing Age Fund. If your brother wants to play, he won't need you to take him to play. He can shut down your account with a few words. Qin Weibai couldn't help laughing. With the style of the Flourishing Age Fund, Han Donglu naturally had a voice in the domestic game market. It just so happened that the game Xianyuan Wushang was playing was developed by a game company under the Flourishing Age Fund. It was bound to major domestic social terminal customer groups, and the situation was very popular. Xianyuan Wushang still wanted to say something, but Li Tianlan obviously didn't want to argue with him. He hung up impatiently and threw the phone aside. It's quite interesting. Qin Weibai chuckled and said, The fat man is obviously not a simple person, but he is willing to stay in the clinic all day, drinking Coke and playing games. I heard that he bought hundreds of cases of Coke some time ago and drank it like water every day. But he didn't get fat when I saw him today. Sooner or later he will get diabetes. Bullshit, doctor. Li Tianlan shook his head. Qin Weibai said softly, Let's have dinner by ourselves. What do you want to eat? No, let's rest. Li Tianlan stood up and stretched himself. He looked at Qin Weibai and smiled wantonly. Qin Weibai blushed and subconsciously wanted to run. But as soon as she turned around, Li Tianlan had directly appeared in front of her and held her in his arms. His sword energy permeated every corner of Emperor Dong's palace. Within the range of the sword energy, he could really move. No matter where Qin Weibai ran, she would directly run into his arms. Can't wait? Li Tianlan's voice was a little playful. Qin Weibai stared at him. Her eyes were charming without any lethality. Go to rest. Aren't you tired? Qin Weibai stammered. Do you remember what you promised me today? Li Tianlan asked, narrowing his eyes. Qin Weibai bit her red lip and didn't speak. She would not be so reluctant, but when she thought of Li Tianlan's demands today, she felt so ashamed that she couldn't lift her head. So naughty. You don't keep your word? Li Tianlan's fingers gently rubbed her chin. Stop it. Qin Weibai pushed him gently. Her pink earlobes turned red. I'll just wear it. First take a shower. Remember that red scarf. I like it very much. Qin Weibai rolled her eyes at him. The tenderness in her eyes was really amorous. Li Tianlan was hot-headed. He carried Qin Weibai in his arms and directly rushed to the bathroom. Half an hour later, he, who had taken advantage of her, was driven out by the goddess who couldn't bear it anymore. In a good mood, he played Qin Weibai's favorite music in the bedroom. He sprayed some perfume in the air and dimmed the lights. Qin Weibai used to do these things. Li Tianlan had seen it many times, so he was also very familiar with it. Qin Weibai continued to dawdle in the bathroom for half an hour. The bathroom door opened. Qin Weibai wrapped herself in a bath towel, walked out quietly, and slipped into the cloakroom. She should be looking for the scarf. Li Tianlan chuckled and took out a cigarette. After thinking for a while, he found a box of cigars from the bedside table, opened it, and lit it. The mellow smoke and the smell of perfume slowly mixed in the air. Nearly 20 minutes later, the cloakroom door was carefully opened. Qin Weibai's trembling voice sounded. Tianlan. Qin Weibai took a puff of the cigar, feeling a little comfortable. Turn off the light, okay? It's very dark. What are you afraid of? Come out and let me see. Li Tianlan sat on the bed and narrowed his eyes. If you don't come out, I'll go in and catch her. There was silence in the cloakroom. Li Tianlan could imagine the goddess standing at the door, hesitating and biting her red lips. Finally, the door of the cloakroom slowly closed. Qin Weibai walked into Li Tianlan's sight little by little. Li Tianlan's breath suddenly stopped, and he subconsciously took a big puff of the cigar. Come here. The smoke came out of his mouth little by little, and his voice trembled slightly. Qin Weibai was really well behaved. She carried out Li Tianlan's request perfectly. Black silk. Black silk. But it was not the kind of stockings that were one piece, but two separate stockings. The silver stilettos studded with diamonds shone with an incomparably seductive luster in the dimly lit room, making her, who was already 1.76 meters tall, look even taller. It seemed that she could not find the red silk scarf. Qin Weibai wore a colorful, soft silk scarf around her slender and proud neck. There was a small silver bell at the front of the scarf, which was gently vibrating with her breathing, making a clear and melodious sound. Qin Weibai was wearing a white top hat and carrying a small handbag in her hand. She seemed a little nervous, but she was still proud and noble as she stood there. High heels, silk stockings, silk scarf, top hat, handbag, such a goddess was dignified and elegant as if she was going to a banquet. But there was no dress, not only no dress, but what? Was no wearing no. She walked over slowly, carrying the handbag, and the silver bell on the silk scarf gently rippled. Li Tianlan touched his nose subconsciously. Fortunately, there was no nosebleed. You're so bad. Qin Weibai walked to Li Tianlan's side, and her face was full of red clouds. Do you want to bully me in different ways every day? You don't like it? Li Tianlan asked. Qin Weibai's eyes were extremely soft, and her voice was sweet. Do you like it? I like it. Li Tianlan nodded seriously. It's very coquettish, but also very cute. Qin Weibai bit her lip and stared at him weakly. Her delicate body was slightly trembling. Li Tianlan took a deep puff of the cigar and forced himself to calm down. He puffed the smoke on Qin Weibai's face, narrowed his eyes and chuckled. Kneel down. Qin Weibai put her legs together and looked at Li Tianlan with hazy eyes. You don't look like you did when you said that you had low self-esteem and lied to me to sleep with you. In the smoke, Qin Weibai saw a pair of firm and fiery eyes. Li Tianlan's voice rang out. You're mine. Qin Weibai hummed in a low voice. Kneel down. Li Tianlan said. Qin Weibai sighed softly and slowly knelt down in front of Li Tianlan. Her movements were elegant and weak. She knelt on the carpet, straightened her upper body, and looked up at Li Tianlan. Her eyes were hazy and blurred. This was undoubtedly the most conquering gesture for men. In his sight was still that perfect and dreamy face. Her face was cold, delicate, and flushed red. She was charming and submissive. I hate it. Qin Weibai's voice was soft. It's so embarrassing. How dare you talk back? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. You're the one who wants to talk back. I didn't. Qin Weibai looked at him with some grievance. Li Tianlan chuckled. Qin Weibai lowered her head. In the room, soft music surrounded them, accompanied by the soft rhythmic sound of silk scarves and silver bells. Li Tianlan gently reached out, took off Qin Weibai's little hat, and stroked her hair, which was still a little wet. Little Bai. His voice was very soft. Little baby? Li Tianlan lowered his head, and the smile in his eyes seemed to be overflowing. It's really strange. Can you tell me why you're not wearing clothes? Hiss. Li Tianlan suddenly took a deep breath. Qin Weibai gently bit him and raised her head. Her breathing was a little disordered, and her eyes were blurred and clear. She said with hatred, I'll fight with you. The wind was blowing outside Emperor Dong's palace. That night, in Dong Huang's bedroom, the crisp silver bells rang until midnight. Chapter 1289. Late at night, in the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, Li Kuangtu, who was sweating profusely, suddenly sat up on the large double bed in the bedroom. His face was deathly pale, and his eyes were muddled. Cold sweat dripped down his face drop by drop. His breathing was extremely rapid, and he closed his eyes to feel his intense heartbeat. He slowly held his breath, and after a long while, he let out a long sigh. His movements were so violent that Phoenix, who had been taking care of her son and had just fallen asleep, also woke up. She moved her body gently, grabbed the clothes and put them on herself. She reached out and touched Li Kuangtu's face, saying softly, Did you have a nightmare? Yes. Li Kuangtu reluctantly said. I dreamed. He suddenly frowned. In the dream, countless pictures began to fade at an unimaginable speed, blurred, and almost disappeared completely. But the palpitations that shook the soul still existed, and they became stronger and stronger. Through the illusory dream, they became clearer and clearer in reality. What did I dream about? Li Kuangtu frowned. He was now one of the grandmasters of Kendo in the dark world, but he was a grandmaster of Kendo in the spiritual field. His willpower was so strong that he shouldn't even dream, let alone have nightmares. It had never happened before that he didn't remember what happened after having a nightmare. What did this mean? Li Kuangtu tried to calm down, trying to grasp the last trace of the dream. Red dress. Snow White. Junkyard. Laughingstock. Li Kuangtu's heart suddenly flashed, and he suddenly said, Who is the sword god? When he asked this, he was also stunned for a moment. This title suddenly emerged from his heart, without antecedents or consequences. It suddenly appeared in his mind, and then began to become more and more profound. What sword god? Phoenix looked at him blankly. Where is the sword god in the dark world now? Who dares to use this title? But I have heard a saying that if Wang Tianzong is the sword emperor of the dark world, then Lin Fengting can be called sword sage. I really don't know how arrogant the title of sword god can be. Even Li Tianlan doesn't have this title now. Yes. Li Kuangtu took a deep breath. The sword god definitely exists. I just saw him. No, I just dreamed of him. No, it's not a dream. No, it's a dream. In the extremely chaotic murmur, Li Kuangtu reached out and grabbed his scalp, pulling it hard. I must have forgotten something. Sword god. Li family. Phoenix gently leaned over and hugged Li Kuangtu tightly. Her voice was a little worried. You're tired. You've been under a lot of pressure recently. Relax and have a good rest. There's no sword god in the dark world. It's just a dream. Sleep for a while, and you'll be fine after you wake up. Li Kuangtu quietly felt the warmth of the phoenix, motionless like a statue. His eyes, which had been a little hazy when he had just woken up, gradually became clear, as if he had returned to his most normal state. He reached out his hand and patted Phoenix's back. He said in a low voice, I'm fine, but I'm more and more sure that I must have experienced something in Emperor Dong's palace, but I forgot about it. After a pause he said softly, It must be something very important. Hypnosis? Phoenix frowned. Li Kuangtu, who had just woken up from a nightmare, was indeed in a somewhat abnormal state of mind, as if he had been hypnotized but failed. Did Qin Weibai do it? Today? No, it was yesterday. No, recently. I haven't seen Qin Weibai. Li Kuangtu shook his head. I'm a little confused now. You sleep first. Let me be quiet for a while. Phoenix took a serious look at him and suppressed her inner worry. Suddenly, she chuckled. You must have been under too much pressure recently. Now that you've regained your freedom and your heart is relaxed, the accumulated pressure during this period will be released with the nightmare. With your current realm, even if you're injured now, how many people in the dark world can hypnotize you? Don't think too much. Well, if you can't sleep, look at your son. The little guy is getting bigger and bigger, and I can't sleep well every night. If you look after him, I can have a good rest. Li Kuangtu smiled, passed Phoenix, sat on the edge of the bed, and looked at the crib in front of him. In the crib, the child, who was a few years old, closed his eyes and fell asleep, breathing evenly and gently. Li Kuangtu looked at his son silently. For no reason, he felt a sharp pain in his heart. It was like a needle suddenly appeared, piercing all the warmth, love, and expectation, and piercing into the deepest part of his heart. The pain was earth-shattering, and the warmth in his heart instantly turned cold and bloody. No, Li Kuangtu said softly. Phoenix, who had just laid down, looked up at him. I must have forgotten something. Li Kuangtu said softly, and his eyes became more and more sober. There must be something very important, but I have forgotten about it. What could it be? Phoenix was a little helpless. Li Kuangtu also wanted to say that it was nothing. He wanted to say that the purgatory of Heaven Capital and Emperor Dong's palace had become enemies. In the enemy's territory, he couldn't get too much confidential information, so it wouldn't be a big deal, even if he ignored some things. But he couldn't convince himself at all. He couldn't remember the dream at all. But the feeling of palpitation, panic, anger, and humiliation began to grow stronger and stronger. All kinds of negative emotions constantly stimulated his spirit and heart, and his heart was extremely uneasy and confused. No, I have to figure out what happened. Li Kuangtu thought silently and began to get dressed. Where are you going? Phoenix got up again and helped Li Kuangtu get dressed. Go to sleep, don't worry about me. Li Kuangtu gently touched Phoenix's hair and didn't answer her question. He got dressed, looked at his son again, and then walked out of the bedroom. It was 3:30 at night. Li Kuangtu looked at his watch, sat on the sofa and smoked 2 cigarettes. Finally, he made up his mind and left his residence. He was going to find Li Huaqing. If he wanted to figure out what he had forgotten, Li Huaqing, who came here with him, was the only clue. Li Kuangtu wasn't sure if Li Huaqing knew something, but when he was in Emperor Dong's palace, Li Huaqing was his only choice. It was not a good idea to disturb people's dreams at this time, but Li Kuangtu didn't want to wait any longer. Li Huaqing lived in a 2-story building not far from Li Kuangtu's villa. The purgatory of Heaven Capital didn't pay much attention to external things. When East Island rose again, Li Kuangtu built Wangtian Pavilion in Heaven Capital. From East Island to Tiannan, the headquarters of the purgatory of Heaven Capital was much more casual. Compared with the ambition of Emperor Dong's palace to swallow the whole Xianyuan city, and even the whole Tiannan, the headquarters of the purgatory of Heaven Capital was a bit shabby. The whole headquarters cost no more than 100 million, and the living conditions were naturally incomparable with Emperor Dong's palace. However, unlike in Emperor Dong's palace, Li Huaqing was really staying here temporarily. The people of the purgatory of Heaven Capital had now begun to pack up. Li Huaqing held a simple ceremony for Li Kuangtu here, and the formal ceremony would be held after returning to Yuzhou. Strictly speaking, the purgatory of Heaven Capital had now become the purgatory army of Zhongzhou State. They would move before noon tomorrow. Whether the headquarters was shabby or not, it would only benefit Li Tianlan, so it didn't matter. Unexpectedly, the lights in the 2-story building where Li Huaqing was staying were still on. Li Kuangtu raised his eyebrows slightly, walked over and knocked on the door. The door opened quickly, and Li Huaqing's secretary Ma Si appeared in front of the door. She looked a little depressed. General, what are you doing? The president hasn't rested yet? Li Guangtu asked. He's on the phone with Huatzi. Ma Si shook her head and sighed. She couldn't help but complain. During this period, the president rarely has time to rest. He is busy until midnight every day. Although the president is not in Yuzhou, he is very concerned about the situation in Yuzhou. Li Guangtu smiled and said softly, "Indeed, he is such a person." Ma Si smiled bitterly and invited Li Guangtu in. She made him a cup of tea, and then walked into the study. Li Guangtu sat silently, holding the teacup and waiting for Li Huaqing to end the call. Li Guangtu could roughly guess the content of this call. It was said that in Huading, there had been a new breakthrough in the storm caused by Wang Xiaoyao, and the situation was getting more and more complicated. It had become a fierce battlefield between the Southeast and the Prince Group, and the academics obviously intended to profit from it. Li Guangtu waited for nearly half an hour. The door of the study was opened from the inside, and Li Huaqing came out. He looked a little tired, but his eyes were still gentle and indifferent. He smiled and said, "What's the matter? Why are you in such a hurry?" "I'm here to ask the president to solve my doubts." Li Guangtu put down the teacup and said slowly, Li Huaqing looked at him strangely. Ma Si came out of the kitchen and put a large fruit plate on the tea table. There were many kinds of fruits in the fruit plate. "Eat some fruit, and tell me slowly." Li Huaqing smiled and said, "It's not bad to stay up late and eat more fruit. Not to mention me, you are not young. It's time to pay attention to health." Li Guangtu picked up the fruit and put it in his mouth. He didn't know what he had eaten until he swallowed it. "President, today in Emperor Dong's palace." Li Guangtu frowned and seemed to be thinking about how to phrase it. "Did I do anything strange?" "What do you mean?" Li Huaqing frowned. "Anything." Li Guangtu's tone was serious and serious. "Except that it was strange that you refused Tianlan's invitation. I didn't find anything else." Li Huaqing smiled and said, "Of course I can understand your refusal. But in the eyes of others, including Tianlan, your refusal was indeed strange. Your refusal is indeed a little strange." "I don't mean that." Li Guangtu shook his head and said, "I always feel that I forgot something very important in Emperor Dong's palace today." "You've already talked about this topic on the way here." Li Huaqing's voice was calm. "You said you forgot a dream. Maybe it's not a dream." Li Guangtu was a little annoyed and barely controlled his tone. "But I don't know what it is. Maybe you just think too much." Li Huaqing ate the apple in his hand and chuckled. "It's the first time in your life that you've been captured, right? Especially when you fell into Tianlan's hands. Your mood during this time should be very complicated. When you're under great pressure, you'll definitely like to think nonsense. It didn't matter when you were in Emperor Dong's palace. Now that you've left that place, once you relax, it's theoretically possible to have some hallucinations. Today's negotiation was very clear from beginning to end. You refused Tianlan's request, but Tianlan didn't refuse the bargaining chip I gave. He became my student, you got freedom, and the purgatory of heaven capital became the purgatory army. What can you forget?" He glanced at Li Guangtu and continued, "But there is something wrong with your current mentality. You should adjust it in time. Guangtu, you're too afraid of Tianlan, so it's hard to put enough pressure on him. This is not what I want to see. I need him to grow under enough pressure." Li Guangtu raised his head and took a deep look at Li Huaqing. His expression was a little cold. From beginning to end, Li Huaqing's attitude was very obvious. He rescued him from Emperor Dong's palace, but the president in front of him never intended to stand with the purgatory of heaven capital. They were not on the same side. To be more precise, the existence of him and the purgatory of heaven capital was just a tool for Li Huaqing to train his students. What would happen to a tool? When it had no value, it was naturally thrown away. Li Guangtu smiled self-deprecatingly. He was sure that he had forgotten something, which was likely to affect the future fate of his family, and even the entire purgatory of heaven capital. But Li Huaqing couldn't empathize with his worries, and he didn't intend to, because in his eyes, these people and these forces were just tools. To put it bluntly, Li Huaqing brought him out of Emperor Dong's palace to let Li Tianlan, who had matured, kill him. But Li Huaqing also gave the purgatory of heaven capital a chance to fight back. But Li Huaqing had always been on Li Tianlan's side. So his worries were a joke in Li Huaqing's eyes. Not to mention that Li Huaqing really didn't seem to know anything. Li Guangtu could be sure that even if he really knew something, he would not tell him. It was undoubtedly a mistake for him to come here tonight. He nodded coldly and said indifferently, "I know what to do." There's still time. After returning to Yuzhou, you can also discuss with Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun. Now the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State really needs some fresh blood. Li Huaqing said casually, glanced at Li Guangtu, who was obviously absent-minded, and suddenly said, "You're really not in a good state now. Is it because when you saw Rushi today, she was not in a good state, and you were worried?" "What?" Li Guangtu suddenly stood up. Li Huaqing's body state straightened a little for a moment. He narrowed his eyes, looked at Li Guangtu and said calmly, "How is Rushi?" "Rushi? Moon God. Qin Weibai." Li Guangtu's breathing suddenly became rapid. "I went to the biological laboratory of Emperor Dong's palace today." Li Huaqing's expression was a little strange. "Is this the thing you forgot?" Li Guangtu took a deep breath. Yes. He forgot that he went to the biological laboratory of Emperor Dong's palace today, and saw his daughter. All the conversations between him and Qin Weibai began to become clear at the moment of recalling. But soon Li Guangtu frowned again. "No, it's not just that. I think I saw someone there." Li Huaqing's expression did not change at all. He ate the fruit in his hand, picked up a tissue to wipe his hands, and then knocked on the table casually. The fingers fell on the table and made a slight sound. But this sound fell in Li Guangtu's ears, and it seemed to be magnified countless times in an instant. Li Guangtu turned his head subconsciously. In an instant he saw Li Huaqing's eyes. Calm, indifferent, warm, yet incomparably deep eyes. Like an abyss. Boom! There seemed to be a huge roar in the void. The extremely fierce spiritual storm instantly enveloped Li Guangtu. Chapter 1290. To be precise, it was a near-perfect ambush. In a situation where Li Guangtu was completely unprepared and his inner emotions were constantly conflicted, at the most suitable time, an incomparably turbulent spiritual storm spread wildly with Li Hua as the center. All the items in the room shook at the same time. At this moment, Li Huaqing keenly grasped Li Guangtu's thoughts. He didn't know what Li Guangtu had forgotten, but with such a good opportunity in front of him, Li Huaqing didn't mind seeing it with his own eyes. Something was wrong with Li Guangtu. From the moment he left Emperor Dong's palace, he felt something was wrong. In terms of spirit, Li Huaqing, who had hidden for many years, was closer to the transcendent realm than Li Guangtu. He was even closer than Qin Weibai before yesterday. The spiritual realm was illusory, but it was also hard to predict. In many cases, the destructive power of this aspect was even more powerful than the destructive power of martial arts. It was also more bizarre and impossible to guard against. Therefore, the past presidents of Zhongzhou State, no, the leaders of countries all over the world, were naturally vigilant toward those who stood at the top of the spiritual field. The presidents of Zhongzhou State would also come into contact with some knowledge in this regard to prevent themselves from being hypnotized. In other words, even if they were hypnotized, they could still realize that their state was not right. Li Huaqing was even more outrageous. In the entire Zhongzhou State, except for Qin Weibai, no one knew that he was also a guru in the spiritual field, infinitely close to the transcendent realm. Li Huaqing pursued the middle way. Even in terms of personal cultivation, he did not choose a direction that was too extreme. In this state, he was not as good as Li Guangtu in terms of the explosive power of his spirit. His real combat capability was probably only at the peak of the invincible realm. In terms of the subtle use of spiritual power, he was not as good as Qin Weibai. He chose the middle way, so he had the terrifying combat capability that Li Huaqing could have. He also had the unpredictable means that Qin Weibai had. The cultivation of the spiritual realm had always been a secret. It was not divided into schools, and it did not have the various characteristics of the 24 moves of sword, or the 6 paths of reincarnation sword in martial arts. Therefore, there were very few people who could study it in depth. It was a complete coincidence that Li Huaqing could walk on this path. And it was precisely because of this coincidence that he was able to do things that even a transcendent realm expert couldn't do under certain circumstances. Li Guangtu's figure was already frozen in place. Li Huaqing tapped his fingers on the table again. The moment the spiritual power that filled the room shook for the second time, Li Guangtu's pupils began to enlarge. Li Huaqing's spiritual storm was synchronized with Li Guangtu's consciousness, and his memory was instantly magnified. Under such circumstances, Li Guangtu's memories and even his life were like a physical object. It was like a book or a computer. Li Huaqing's mental storm became a magnifying glass. The things in Li Guangtu's memory began to be replayed under a magnifying glass, including the things he had forgotten and had almost no impression of. All of them began to expand and become clear. Li Guangtu's thoughts became something that could be touched directly. Li Huaqing entered Li Guangtu's consciousness. The pervasive darkness in the space of consciousness lasted for less than half a second. In an instant, broken, torn, Li Guangtu saw a violent and dazzling light. It was a sword light that pierced through heaven and earth. There seemed to be countless people talking in different languages, and it was hard to hear them clearly. It was as if there were countless people doing different things, and it was hard to see clearly. Only the sword light tore through heaven and earth, extremely dazzling. Li Huaqing's spirit instantly became dispirited, and his brain was in severe pain. Only he could see that the sword light was still shining, getting brighter and brighter. It was the endless fallen leaves and the boundless darkness. Light and darkness, reality and illusion were crazily intertwined in Li Guangtu's consciousness. The source of the sword energy was an extremely vague, but extremely perfect figure. He stood under the heavy snow in the daytime, flicking up the fallen leaves. Half of the North Sea tore Mount Dibbing apart. He stood in the burning ruins, facing the majestic city wall. The eternal sword, the name of the sword was Donghuang. Dead silence, indifference, madness, and tyranny. That was the sword light that Li Huaqing had never seen with his own eyes. With the power to destroy everything, it merged darkness and light together. The city wall and Mount Dibbing were constantly intertwined in that picture, and finally all became nothingness. Li Huaqing suddenly let out a muffled groan. The sword light in the depths of his consciousness seemed to have cut off his spiritual power. The moment his spiritual power retreated from Li Guangtu's consciousness, he heard a familiar yet strange voice say a completely unfamiliar, yet somewhat familiar name. Li Dongcheng. Boom. All the spiritual power was instantly broken. Blood flowed from Li Huaqing's eyes, ears, and nostrils, and his body trembled violently. The surrounding space seemed to be constantly rotating, faster and faster. Li Huaqing reached out and pressed the table hard, resisting the feeling of fainting, and kept taking deep breaths. His brain became clearer than ever. That sword light, that city wall, that Mount Dibbing. These were the things that Li Guangtu forgot when he was in Emperor Dong's palace. But why did he forget these things when he was in Emperor Dong's palace? Mount Dibbing was in North Sea, and that city wall and ruins, if he remembered correctly, were probably similar to the East Island Imperial Palace that Li Huaqing saw when he visited East Island last year. That magnificent and unparalleled sword light was brilliant, turning the surroundings of the East Island Imperial Palace into ruins, and even completely tearing the entire palace apart. Li Huaqing had been the president for so many years, but he had never heard of such an awesome attack in East Island. If it didn't happen in reality, it naturally didn't exist. That was to say, Li Guangtu saw something that didn't exist in Emperor Dong's palace, and forgot about it? Didn't exist. Li Huaqing suddenly stopped breathing. That sword light replayed crazily in his mind countless times. At this moment, Li Huaqing suddenly felt that the world around him was extremely cold. Didn't exist. Yes, the sword light he saw tearing the East Island Imperial Palace apart didn't exist. But a sword light connected the two pictures. He also saw that sword light tearing Mount Dibbing apart. And this thing, it existed, and it had already happened. That was when Li Tianlan was still in the desert prison. Mount Dibbing in Beihai province was attacked by a mysterious superior, and the opponent's sword directly tore Mount Dibbing apart. When some incomplete videos were sent to the Dark World, the whole Dark World was shocked and frightened. This sword move was not long from the Eternal Sword move. At that time, The Dark World generally thought that this sword move on Mount Dibbing already had the power of Mormon's eternal sword move. Everyone thought that the Dark World had already given birth to a new heavenly son after Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong. But until now, the Dark World couldn't confirm the identity of the mysterious superior. The opponent suddenly appeared in Shenzhou, and then suddenly disappeared in Beihai after a sword move, as if he had never existed. But there were still traces of them here. That was them. The private plane they took to Beihai. That Airbus could be said to be the most luxurious of the private planes. But after many forces investigated the Airbus company in France, they found that Airbus didn't have the factory number of that private plane at all. Similarly, the space agencies of various countries didn't have the registration number of this plane. This also meant Airbus had never produced this plane, and this plane had never been registered in the civil aviation system of various countries, nor had it obtained any license. At the same time, Beihai found a lot of terrifying weapon modification systems in that private plane. It was said that the design ideas of several of the weapons were at least 20 or 30 years ahead of the current weapons, and they were hidden by Beihai. Whether this statement was true or not, it was impossible to prove at present. At the same time, it could be confirmed that this plane suddenly appeared over Beihai province, and it was impossible to find out where it took off. All kinds of facts had an incomprehensible and mysterious flavor. This matter also shocked the scientific community all over the world. A large group of quantum mechanics bigwigs were studying the information of this incident and published one paper after another, thinking that this plane and the mysterious superior were a coincidence from a parallel world. The top physicists in the scientific community of Zhongzhou State were also among them, but these research papers were all sealed up in secret. But combined with this matter, the corners of Li Huaqing's mouth kept twitching. He quickly sorted out his understanding. First of all, in the depths of Li Guangtu's consciousness, the sword light that he saw tearing Mount Dibbing was real from the current point of view. But the sword light that destroyed the East Island Imperial Palace was illusory. And this sword light, as well as a lot of pictures that flashed with the sword light, were things that Li Guangtu had forgotten. In other words, in the biological laboratory during the time he forgot in Emperor Dong's palace, Li Guangtu once again saw the sword light that tore Beihai apart. At the same time, he also saw a lot of things that had never happened, at least not here. No matter how he looked at it, Li Huaqing could see these in Emperor Dong's palace. At least it could prove that the mysterious superior who destroyed Mount Dibbing with a sword had something to do with Emperor Dong's palace. His thoughts were flashing fast. Li Huaqing thought of the last voice he heard when he left Li Guangtu's consciousness. That name. That familiar but strange voice. It was the voice of Summer Solstice, the hostess of the Wang family of Beihai. Li Dongcheng. He didn't know this name. But the familiar feeling was getting stronger and stronger. If the mysterious superior was called Li Dongcheng and had something to do with Emperor Dong's palace, who would this person be based on his life experience? Who else could it be? Li Huaqing took a deep breath. In his mind, he thought of the research papers published by the top scientists. They wanted to prove the existence of parallel spaces through various explanations. Li Huaqing had read those papers before. He didn't understand them, but it didn't matter anymore. If his speculation was true, then it didn't matter what those explanations were. What mattered was that he saw the evidence deep in Li Guangtu's consciousness. The sword stroke in Mount Dibbing was the evidence left here. As for the other scenes, it wasn't that they hadn't happened before. It was just that they hadn't happened in this space. Li Guangtu forgot a lot of things, but he still remembered this sword stroke. Because this sword stroke was real in this space, and it was an anchor point that could not be erased. Speaking of which, all of these speculations were actually self-justifying. Countless thoughts kept flashing in Li Huaqing's mind. He found that there was no shock in his heart, but a sense of relief. The world was big. He knew this as early as when he came into contact with spiritual cultivation. Li Huaqing opened his eyes reluctantly. In the bloody sight, he reached out and grabbed the tissue near the fruit plate, took out a piece, and slowly wiped the blood in his eyes, ears, nostrils, and mouth. An incomparably sharp gaze was locked onto him, not even blinking for a moment. Li Huaqing wiped his face and lightly said, "If you need an apology, I can tell you that I'm sorry." Li Guangtu's eyes were almost spewing fire. What did you do to me? You said you forgot something. I just used a simpler way to help you recall it. Li Huaqing said. You hypnotized me. Li Guangtu's eyes were almost spewing fire. You know hypnosis. You can hypnotize me. Transcendent realm? Almost. Li Huaqing smiled. As I said, there is a big problem with your current state. If I want to hypnotize you now, I don't necessarily need the spiritual power of the transcendent realm. Of course, when you recover from your injury and adjust, I won't have a chance. Li Guangtu was silent for a while, and suddenly sneered. I'm really a tiger that has fallen to the ground. Li Huaqing looked at him and didn't speak. His eyes were calm, but extremely deep. Li Guangtu's voice was getting lower and lower, and finally became silent. I'm not a dog. Li Huaqing's voice was very quiet. In front of me, you are not a tiger. Even in your heyday you are not a tiger. Li Guangtu was silent for a long time, and then laughed at himself. Your Excellency, you really hit it well. The whole Zhongzhou state, no, the whole world is hidden by you. With your strength, you should be on the divine list. In any case, there should be a place for you in the top 3 of the divine list. It's a false reputation if I don't reach the top. Li Huaqing smiled very gently. And I'm the president of Zhongzhou state. What can I show off on the divine list? Li Guangtu looked at Li Huaqing silently. After a long time he nodded and said sincerely, You taught me a lesson and I learned it. Li Huaqing didn't speak. He threw away the bloody tissue in his hand, and continued to eat the fruit. There was deep exhaustion in his eyes. Forcibly reading, or even magnifying a person's memory, especially for an expert like Li Guangtu, who was seriously injured but had surpassed the invincible realm, it was a kind of overload in itself. Li Huaqing's limit was to read his memory within 24 hours, and the time was only a few minutes at most. But the memory in Li Guangtu's consciousness was too exciting. That sword strike was unprecedentedly fierce. Li Huaqing saw many pictures in the sword light, but what he could really see clearly was only that sword strike. If his spiritual power could break through the transcendent realm, he might be able to completely see what Li Guangtu saw at that time. What did you see? Li Guangtu was silent for a long time. Then he suppressed his inner anger and asked slowly. After deciding to leave the Heavenly South region and go to Yuzhou, the first thing he would do was to hide and stabilize his injuries. Li Huaqing, who was infinitely close to the transcendent realm, would be too dangerous if he was still in the same state. I saw a sword light and heard a name. Li Huaqing's voice was a little playful, with a little tentative tone that no one could hear. Li Guangtu froze for a moment. Do you know who the mysterious expert who tore Mount Dibbing apart with one sword strike 2 years ago was? Li Huaqing asked. Li Guangtu wanted to say that he didn't know, but when the words came to his mouth, he suddenly became a little hesitant. He didn't know. However, he suddenly felt that it was inconceivable that he didn't know about this matter. What I saw was that sword light. Li Guangtu said. That should be the most impressive thing in your forgotten memory. That sword light not only tore Mount Dibbing apart, but the sword light overlapped. In the overlapped picture, I saw that the sword light completely destroyed the Imperial Palace of East Island. There seemed to be a Mikado in a yellow robe standing in front of the Imperial Palace, but it was not the one I knew. Looking at the figure, it seemed to be a little like you, but it was not you. Li Guangtu continued to be silent, as if he had become a statue. I also heard a name. Li Huaqing continued to say, his name is Li Dongcheng. Li Guangtu's heart shook wildly. He suddenly stood up and blurted out, Sword God Li Dongcheng. Sword God. Li Dongcheng. Li Huaqing's pupils suddenly contracted, and he finally found out something. But after getting a vague result, Li Huaqing felt a little tired. Damn it, what kind of enmity does my name, Li Huaqing, have with your Li family? First Li Huazhang, then Li Dongcheng. Are you trying to blackmail me? He rubbed his eyebrows and said in a deep voice, Sword God? Explain. Li Guangtu opened his mouth and said, I forgot. He was completely silent. Sword God, Li Dongcheng. This title, this name was so familiar that it seemed real. He did forget a lot of things. But just as Li Huaqing could think of many things through this name, Li Guangtu, who knew Li Tianlan's life experience, also understood what the name Li Dongqing meant. He could even think of more things. But when he thought of these things, the more he thought about it, the more uneasy he became. And an idea in his heart seemed to start to become clearer. That idea, that decision, seemed to have been decided before, but he forgot the decision. And at this time, the idea became obvious again. Li Guangtu stood up. He thought silently, and left silently without saying goodbye to Li Huaqing. Li Huaqing squinted at his back, thoughtfully, and didn't speak for a long time, until another voice abruptly rang out. "It's you." I didn't expect that the one who could get in touch with the fragment of order was the president of Zhongzhou state of this generation. They really don't give up. Li Huaqing suddenly woke up and looked up. In his sight, the god of war in a black dragon robe stood silently in front of him. Blood mist continued to spread across his body. Countless hideous and terrifying wounds appeared all over his body and healed over and over again. In the blood mist, the eyes of the god of war were a little fierce. In an instant, Li Huaqing only felt that the hair all over his body was standing on end. There seemed to be omnipresent sharpness everywhere around him. Wisps of sharpness existed in the most subtle places, and every wisp seemed to have a fatal threat to him. "Who are you?" Li Huaqing's attention was completely focused. The god of war wanted to speak, but then he looked around and didn't find the fat man. He seemed a little bored and didn't bother to introduce himself. He said directly, "What does order mean? Do you understand?" Li Huaqing hesitated and shook his head. "I feel that you are peeping into Li Guangtu's memory." The god of war narrowed his eyes. "This method is very unique. At least, Qin Weibai and that Saint Emperor can't do it. They can only vaguely feel it, but you seem to be looking directly. Spiritual power is one of the most terrifying powers, but there are many ways to use it. Currently, people here are just exploring, including that Saint Emperor and Qin Weibai. They are just exploring, just like a child who knows that 2 + 2 = 4, but doesn't know that 1 + 3 = 4. They also don't know that 2 × 2 = 4. This is just something they have figured out on their own. It is very shallow, but it belongs to them." The god of war said faintly, "And your spiritual power seems to have received systematic training. Not only can you add, subtract, multiply and divide, you even know the equation. Your power is not something you fumble, but it is bestowed by the world." Li Huaqing stared at the god of war, not saying a word. "Let me change the question. One that Qin Weibai and Saint Emperor don't know. The beginning of spiritual power. What is it called?" The god of war asked. The corner of Li Huaqing's mouth moved. He wanted to say that he didn't know, but when the words came to his mouth, he chose to tell the truth. "The beginning of spiritual power is the initiator. Then do you know what you are now?" The god of war narrowed his eyes. "It should be the consciousness statue," Li Huaqing said hesitantly. "And then?" the god of war continued to ask. Li Huaqing shook his head. "I don't know. That's all I know." "How do you know these things?" the god of war asked. Li Huaqing didn't answer. This involved the core secret of Zhongzhou state. He looked at the god of war and said calmly, "Who are you?" "Forget it," the god of war said faintly. "Your question is not important for now. According to the rules, you are the president of Zhongzhou state. At this point in time, I am here to say hello to you. I will give you a kind advice. You are a good president and have deep feelings for Zhongzhou state. But if you continue to break through in the spiritual field, the consequences will be unimaginable." "What do you mean?" Li Huaqing frowned. The god of war shook his head and didn't say much. Li Huaqing could directly get the fingerprint of the will of the world. And now he planned to make Li Tianlan his successor. From these actions, Li Huaqing himself didn't know that he might have become a pawn in the game between the neutral camp and the order camp. Letting Li Tianlan take over is the right thing to do. If there is still time, he should be able to stop some things. I hope you can move faster. You don't tell me your identity in the middle of the night, but tell me this directly. Are you going to tell me that my good student is destined by God? Li Huaqing didn't know whether to laugh or cry. There is no such thing as destiny. We shouldn't believe in the so-called mandate of heaven while we are alive. The war god said faintly, the so-called world, the so-called heaven's will, is most proficient in erasing the arrogance of the arrogant, destroying the arrogance of the arrogant, and destroying the arrogance of the traitors. As a human, the so-called fate should be in our own hands. You should do what you should do. Li Huaqing's eyes flickered. For example, the end is on, and the end of the world is coming. The god of war took a deep look at him. You're on your own. When you really make up your mind, maybe we can talk again. Chapter 1291. Li Huaqing didn't understand but felt it was awesome. The end had begun. The apocalypse was coming. Apocalypse? His voice was filled with absurdity. You mean the apocalypse? At this moment, he didn't feel like the other party was a swindler. He just instinctively didn't believe it. It's the apocalypse of humanity. Don't think too highly of yourself. Even if humanity dies, the world is still the world. It's just that there will be fewer toys, but there will be new toys to replace them. You, me, and everyone else can survive. What does that have to do with the world? There won't be an apocalypse in the world, only humanity will. The corner of War God's mouth curled up. His smile was filled with mockery and coldness. Li Huaqing looked at his figure silently. The endless blood mist seemed to be his eternal background, constantly drifting around him. Through the blood mist, he seemed to see an incomparably great background. He narrowed his eyes and suddenly said, "Aren't you going to introduce yourself?" He used honorifics. War God Realm, War God. The black dragon robe swayed lightly. Countless patterns changed crazily, finally turning into a flying dragon bearing its fangs and claws. Li Huaqing's spirit swept past the figure in front of him. His spirit power felt every detail. He could clearly feel that the dragon on the dragon robe was starting to crack. War God glanced at him and said quietly, "A very long time ago, even if this is a very long time ago, there was a very powerful creature in the Order camp. They were originally a part of the world, and liked to live in groups. However, every single one of them, when they grew up, they would reach the pinnacle of strength. Some of them were very big, and could even penetrate through the galaxy. Their bodies could change between real and illusory. When they were real, their bodies were almost indestructible. Each scale had the energy to crush stars. When they were illusory, they would turn into dark energy and dark matter, almost undetectable. They occupied the starry sky and viewed planets as dust. A lot of dust was on their bodies. Therefore, each and every one of them could be considered a small world. Countless planets, stars, and even galaxies were born and destroyed on their bodies. Li Huaqing's face was a little pale. They didn't need to do anything, nor did they need to maintain anything, because their existence itself was the order of the world. Do you know what pure order looks like? War God suddenly asked. Without waiting for Li Huaqing's reply, he continued. Deathly stillness, dullness, everything is doomed, everything is unchanging, a pool of stagnant water. Later on, this creature discovered that some of the dust in its body produced a large amount of energy, and some gave birth to life. The War God went silent for a bit, then slowly spoke. For the world, living beings that naturally yearn for freedom is an accident in itself. From the world's point of view, these incomparably huge creatures have been contaminated by this life form. They've had enough of boredom and don't know the meaning of their existence. The more lives there are in the starry sky, the more excited their hearts are. Thus, they gradually began to form their own image. Horns like a deer, head like a camel, eyes like a rabbit, neck like a snake, belly like a crab, scales like a fish, claws like an eagle, palms like a tiger, ears like a cow. Thus the individual thought was born. They often turn their consciousness into infinitely smaller versions of themselves. Then, entering the dust on their body, these creatures began their first interaction with real life. That period of time was very interesting. Countless concepts of life began to constantly impact the thoughts of these creatures. Compared to their hundreds of millions of years of dullness, it was clear that living beings with the aura of freedom were the most attractive to them, but also the most rebellious. They gradually became attracted by the various characteristics of life. Of course, it could also be said to be tempting. They are the same as living beings. They can accept order, but they can't accept absolute order. They can accept chaos, but they can't accept chaos without order. After coming into contact with living beings, they gradually developed their own preferences, and even formed their own order. From this perspective, as a part of the world's order, they betrayed the world. Silence. A long silence. Li Huaqing listened with great interest as if he was listening to a heavenly book. Seeing that the war god suddenly became silent, he was startled. And then? I don't know. The war god went silent for a bit. During that period of time, everything was blank. The ending shouldn't be hard to imagine. The apocalypse descended, all life was wiped out, everything was in chaos. Li Huaqing's heart suddenly turned cold. The war god's voice was very calm. But as he spoke, Li Huaqing's heart was inexplicably enveloped by an abrupt sense of fear. Extinction of life. He muttered to himself. If there is extinction, there will be new life. Any civilization will go extinct, but life will never disappear. The war god said calmly. After the first extinction of life, the powerful creatures that betrayed the world returned to the world's order. The new life began to evolve from single cells. This time, the new life had more types, the evolution was wilder, and they worshipped freedom. This kind of freedom once again attracted the powerful creatures that had returned to the direct order. And the second betrayal appeared naturally. So the apocalypse descended again. Li Huaqing asked. Perhaps anyone who heard this story would think that the war god was talking nonsense. But Li Huaqing didn't. In his heart, he didn't have the concept of believing or not. He just seriously accepted this story. This time it was war. The war god laughed. The war between humans and the world. Li Huaqing didn't say anything. His eyes became extremely focused. Of course, what you said is also correct. The apocalypse did indeed descend, and the world once again wiped out all the living creatures at that time. But perhaps due to the war being too intense, or perhaps due to other reasons, this extinction was an accident. First of all, there were 2 living creatures that didn't die during the extinction, and luckily survived. Secondly, the powerful creature that betrayed the world for the second time also survived. The war god became silent again. Another blank? Li Huaqing couldn't help but ask. The war god seemed to have smiled. In a trance, the great figure formed from countless blood mists seemed to have completely overlapped with him. That should be the first war against the world. I mean, it was the first time in my memory. There might have been many times before, but I don't know much about them. The first war against the world came to an end. There were very few living creatures left. With the help of that powerful creature, the last few living creatures made different choices. One chose to live as long as heaven and earth, using his own death to suspend the world's will. The other went to the end of the world and restarted the cycle of reincarnation. One used his own body as a tool to obliterate his own soul, and gave his skin to his best friend. His friend used his skin to disguise himself. His friend used his skin to take the most powerful weapon against the world, luck. And the powerful creature that betrayed the world for the second time, when it was on the verge of extinction, entered his skin that contained luck and survived with great difficulty. The skin he left behind fused with luck and that powerful creature, forming the first divine artifact after the first war against the world. It was called the Infinite Worlds. He became the foundation. The last 2 have become our hope. After the cycle of reincarnation was restarted, they survived and relied on the existence of the infinite worlds to get through the most difficult period. They gave their kind of life a definition, or rather a name. They felt that their kind of life should be called. The war god suddenly looked at Li Huaqing. Do you know what that name is? Li Huaqing shook his head blankly. Human. The war god gave his answer. They felt that their kind of life should be called human. That is the origin of the ancient human race. Meanwhile, the powerful creatures that fought alongside them completely broke away from the order of the world, and began to live on the destiny of the human race. Thus, they became the first totems of the ancient human race. The first humans called them the dragon race. Humans and dragon race. Life and world. Li Huaqing, who had been listening with great interest, smiled. A new version of the myth? That's interesting. Then let's talk about something more interesting. The war god also smiled. The first 2 humans created the human race. Who are they? Li Huaqing's smile was obvious as he interrupted the war god. She. The war god was silent for a while and said, combining the known myths, Li Huaqing quickly locked onto a target. Fuxi? It's he. The war god said lightly. This name is a single word. She and his sister Shi Bai. They were the first two ancient humans. It was also them who defined their life form as human. Later on, people used to call them Emperor Shi and Empress Shi. No. Li Huaqing shook his head seriously. Later on, people used to call them Fuxi and Niuhua. The war god had a feeling that this little brother was talking nonsense with him, so he simply ignored him and continued. In the eyes of the world, Shi is a warrior and Shi Bai is a thief. The former cut off a part of the world's ability to control the rules of the world. The latter, in a sense, stole a part of the world's imagination. Hence, they created the current human race. It is creation, a method that combines reproduction and imagination. Fighting against the world is the mission of the human race from then until now. Later on, Shi and Shi Bai still fell. However, before they fell, they created a force that could barely fight against the world. This power had an order similar to the rules of the world, but it was not an absolute order. It had a chaos similar to the rules of the world, but it was not an absolute chaos either. This power had found a balance between absolute order and chaos, so this power was called the neutral power by later generations. In fact, there are 3 paths. When you reach the peak of each path, you can barely fight against the evil of the world. This is what they left, and it has been passed down to this day. It is also the most precious treasure. With this force, more and more young talents appeared in the human race, such as Great Emperor Xianyuan, Emperor Yan, Xingtian. Li Huaqing nodded cooperatively. The war god glanced at him and continued expressionlessly. When the later generations reach the true peak along these 3 paths, they will be qualified to represent the human race and bear the heavy responsibility of protecting the human race against the world. They are called human emperors. In the heyday of the human race, there were 5 human emperors, including Huangshi. Do you know who the last human emperor was? The war god looked at Li Huaqing and asked. You can combine it with the history you know. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes. The title of human emperor was very old for Zhongzhou state. People were familiar with the title of emperor, or in other words, emperor. Who was the first emperor in the history of Zhongzhou state? The answer couldn't be more obvious. Emperor Zhou, who was known as a peerless emperor, and had hundreds of sons. According to this logic, the last human emperor was King Zhou of Shang, who was famous in history for spending too much money, but only had 2 sons. Shang dynasty and Zhou dynasty? Li Huaqing asked. The investiture of the gods that you know might not be fake. Of course, the 3 religions are more of a story. In fact, it was a war between the human race and the world order. It can also be regarded as a civil strife within the human race. We don't need to argue about the cause of that incident. But in that incident, too many experts of the human race were forcibly conferred as gods and returned to the order. The human race suffered heavy losses, and its luck collapsed. The will of heaven and earth began to gradually gain the upper hand. It was from then on that there were no more human emperors in history, only emperors. But this is the place where the ancient human race rose. As long as there are people, the luck of the human race won't disappear completely. For thousands of years, the luck of the human race was entangled with the will of heaven and earth. Therefore, in the history of the dynasties during this period, the human race didn't really prosper for a long time. Shi and Shi Bai also died in that investiture of the gods. During this period, the will of heaven and earth and the luck of the human race kept entangling until the founding of Zhongzhou state. Until people began to return one after another. The will of heaven and earth that shrouded history was suppressed, and the luck of the human race also began to return. What do you mean by return? Li Huaqing suddenly asked. War God glanced at him and said calmly, break the reincarnation and return to the starry sky. This sentence was extremely simple, but Li Huaqing's blood was boiling for no reason. 2 people returned this time, and they both left legends that lasted to this day in Zhongzhou state. One was called the Heavenly Sun, and the family he left behind is still strong. The other was called War God, and the family he left behind is also continuous. I know. Li Huaqing nodded. The ancestor of the Wang family of Beihai. The ancestor of the Lin clan in seclusion. War God laughed at himself and said, their return completely suppressed the will of heaven and earth here. But that heavenly son was not very lucky. Or rather, he was not as lucky as the ancestor of the Lin clan, because after he returned, he found himself. Found himself? Li Huaqing was a little confused. At this moment, he saw War God's eyes clearly. There was a meaningful smile in War God's eyes, and he said softly, he found the human skin that he left behind, which belonged to him. A feeling of numbness on his scalp instantly rushed into Li Huaqing's mind. His gaze subconsciously fell on the black robe of the god of war. The black dragon robe was awe-inspiring and majestic. On the dragon robe, countless dragons wandered slowly as if they were alive, piecing together into one pattern after another. Dragon. Clan. All worlds. He found the human skin that belonged to him that he left behind. Li Huaqing held his breath subconsciously. The voice of War God continued. Only when he found the skin could he be considered to be completely integrated with himself in mythology and history, and he could stand at the peak of a certain field. And standing at this peak, what do you think he would think? The current peak he is at, the path he is walking on, was founded by that best friend of his. 3 paths, 3 beginnings, all of this is just the beginning. So after he completely found himself, he wore the human skin left by his former self, and returned to the place where he first returned as a consciousness formed by a wisp of memory, intending to find the 4th path for the human clan. By the way, he also came to see his former best friend, who is still returning. Then, War God laughed. Then he saw the president of Zhongzhou state of this generation, and accidentally found that he had awakened the power of order. He felt it necessary to say hello to the president, so he came and told him a story. Li Huaqing's hair all stood on end. He stared at War God in front of him, opened his eyes to the widest, and said word by word, "You are Lin Xianyuan?" War God's realm, War God Lin Xianyuan. War God nodded. Thunder roared. Li Huaqing stood up abruptly and sat back on the chair weakly. War God's realm. Lin clan. War God's realm. Li Huaqing kept muttering to himself and finally smiled bitterly. If what you said is true, then your War God's realm is definitely not on Earth, right? In the starry sky. War God nodded. You are the president of Zhongzhou state. You can't be unfamiliar with extraterrestrial civilization. Isn't that what Bureau 719 of Zhongzhou state does? Bureau 719 of Zhongzhou state. This was a department that most people had never heard of. There was no official information about it, and its functions were absolutely vague. It was independent of any system, and only answered to the president. This was a top-secret department that specialized in studying all kinds of supernatural phenomena and unsolved mysteries. Extraterrestrial civilization, extraterrestrial life, UFOs. These were things that ordinary people were familiar with but skeptical about. There was corresponding information in Bureau 719 of Zhongzhou state. Zhongzhou state, Star State, and all the major powers in the world had even received signals from the starry sky. For them, the so-called extraterrestrial civilization was really not a secret. Li Huaqing was not surprised that there was a starry sky life. He was surprised that the big boss of the starry sky in front of him turned out to be an acquaintance from Zhongzhou state. This feeling was really refreshing, and it also had a really nice feeling. Do your current abilities have anything to do with Bureau 719? War God suddenly asked. Li Huaqing hesitated for a moment before slowly nodding his head. He sighed softly. It's my classmate. He used to be the deputy director of Bureau 719. When I was the deputy speaker of Liaodong once found a very special meteorite with some symbols carved on it. My classmate deciphered some of the information and leaked it to me. It was some way of using spiritual power. However, what those symbols expressed seemed to be not realms, but power? Authority. War God gave the most accurate way to interpret it. The corner of Li Huaqing's mouth moved, but he remained silent. Your classmate should be dead, right? War God asked. Missing. Li Huaqing sighed. The day after he told me these things, he disappeared. It was a critical period for me. I was afraid that it would involve me, so I didn't dare to say it. Heh, War God sneered. Bullsh asterisk T. He's a puppet of the will of heaven and earth. He deliberately leaked this information to you in order to guide you to this path. After you break through again, you, the president, will become the spokesperson of the will of the world. At that time, with you in this position, the will of the world will once again overwhelm the luck of the human race. Zhongzhou's state won't last long, and the end of the world will come early. Li Huaqing's body shook violently, and he suddenly looked up. Impossible. He thought about it, shook his head and said, "At that time, I was just the deputy speaker of Liaodong. How could it be?" "What's impossible?" War God narrowed his eyes slightly and whispered. "Have you ever felt that you worked very hard to do something, but when you were one step away from success, you failed? You felt that you didn't work hard enough, so you worked harder again and tried your best to do it. But when you were one step away from success, you failed for various reasons. Sometimes, there are some things that you are not interested in, but these things try their best to get close to you. There are many things that seem to be coincidences, but they are all things that people have to experience in their life. Different experiences, different endings, different consequences. If you do it again, it will be the same. If you do it again and again, it will be the same. It's like a dead knot that can't be untied and escaped." War God's voice slightly lowered. "This is destiny. Everything, your life, what you do, what you get, what you lose, where you are, what you say, what you do. Haha, in fact, all of this has nothing to do with you at all. This was because everything had already been predestined. It was like a well-designed program. It looked very lively, but in essence, it was absolutely rigid. Everything about you was predestined. From birth to death, there will be no accidents, no coincidences. From the beginning to the end, you are under the control of the will of the world, like a puppet. This is destiny, such a fate. Are you willing to accept it?" Li Huaqing's chest slightly rose and fell. "This is the meaning of the human clan's resistance," War God said calmly. "Fate, life and death, these should be in your own hands. From the moment you accepted the spiritual authority, you already had half a foot in the order realm. Everything about you is destined to be good." "I don't believe it." Li Huaqing shook his head. "I don't believe in predestination. I don't believe that my life has nothing to do with me. That's the truth. In fact, even in the real environment, if you have half a foot into the order, there is almost no possibility of struggling. But you met Li Tianlan. That's why I said that you made the right choice to choose Li Tianlan as your successor. Because in the real environment, his real brand can completely suppress the erosion of the order and the will of the world and break this so-called predestination." "Real environment?" Li Huaqing asked. "Yes. Real brand?" Li Huaqing continued to ask. War God still nodded. "Yes." Li Huaqing took a deep breath, looked at War God, and said softly, "What is this? Don't you want to explain?" You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.